Chapter 647, Realm of Experts. Currently, the highest tiered gemstone one could obtain from monsters in God's domain was a Tier 2. As for Tier 3 gemstones, they only dropped from level 30 and above large-scale dungeons. Meanwhile, NPC alchemists only had a 20% success rate to synthesize Tier 3 gemstones. The cost involved was massive. Currently, Tier 2 gemstones sold for 1 gold. Ignoring the labor fees and with average luck, one would require at least 20 Tier 2 gemstones to synthesize a Tier 3 gemstone. The cost alone was 20 gold. It was simply not realistic for a guild to supply its main force with Tier 3 gemstones. However, the attributes Tier 3 gemstones provided were significantly higher than Tier 2 gemstones. Tier 1 gemstones only increased a single attribute by 3 points. Tier 2 gemstones increased a single attribute by 6 points. As for Tier 3 gemstones, they increased a single attribute by 12 points. If one embedded every piece of equipment they had with Tier 3 gemstones, it would be the equivalent of wearing an additional piece of top-tier equipment. This would significantly increase a player's combat power. To the large guild's main forces, upgrading attributes was limited because their equipment had already reached a certain level. If an ordinary player swapped out their full set of bronze equipment for a full set of mysterious iron equipment, their strength would rise by a single level. However, a large guild's main force usually wore the highest quality equipment they could get their hands on. If it were not dark gold rank, then at the very minimum, they would wear fine gold rank. Hence, it was extremely difficult to upgrade their equipment. If they could receive a bonus to their attributes that had as large of an impact as another piece of dark gold equipment, it would make a huge difference. Without rest, Shifeng spent half the day synthesizing Tier 2 gemstones. In the end, he transformed the 30,000 Tier 1 gemstones into 7,500 Tier 2 gemstones. The success rate for synthesizing Tier 3 gemstones is actually as high as 80%. Shifeng could not help but grin when he saw the message that the Philosopher's Stone displayed. Initially, Shifeng would have been satisfied with a 60% success rate. After all, NPC alchemist's success rate was only 20%. Furthermore, Shifeng's luck attribute was also relatively high. That would most likely lower his expenditure even further. 4 hours later, Shifeng had a total of 1,674 Tier 3 gemstones, 174 more than his initial estimation. If I sold all these Tier 3 gemstones, just how many more plots of land could I buy for the candlelight trading firm? Shifeng sighed as he stared at the Tier 3 gemstones cluttering the table. It was no wonder why the Philosopher's Stone was a treasure that could incite war between kingdoms and empires. Moreover, it was currently incomplete. Shifeng could not even begin to fathom just how powerful the complete Philosopher's Stone would be. In the past, during God's domain's initial stages, a Tier 3 gemstone could sell for 25 gold. Its price was more than 10 times higher than Tier 2 gemstones. If Shifeng sold all 1,674 Tier 3 gemstones, he could earn over 40,000 gold. That was enough money to purchase 3 or 4 golden lands. Meanwhile, he had only spent 900 gold on the gemstones. However, Shifeng had no intentions of selling the Tier 3 gemstones. What Zero Wing lacked right now was a large group of experts. With these Tier 3 gemstones he could elevate Zero Wing's strength to a whole new level. That way, the guild would have the power to support and stabilize the candlelight trading firm's development. Just as Shifeng was excitedly contacting Aqua Rose and preparing to replace the main force's Tier 2 gemstones with Tier 3 gemstones, the situation at White River City's Divine Coliseum had reached a boiling point. More experts from Heaven's Burial suddenly broke through the 4th floor of the trial tower. Currently, the guild had a total of 42 members who had reached the 5th floor, double that of their previous record and surpassing Zero Wing's previous record of 36 people. Although 3 more people from Zero Wing have passed through the 4th floor, Heaven's Burial is superior. Another 22 of their people have passed the 4th floor within the same time span. It really makes you wonder just how they have nurtured so many experts. It seems that Heaven's Burial has a chance of replacing Zero Wing as White River City's overlord. Overwhelming Smile isn't doing too bad either. Today, another 8 people have reached the 5th floor, pushing their total to 37. Right now, Overwhelming Smile is only behind Zero Wing by 2 people. In another 1 or 2 days, Overwhelming Smile's number of experts will probably surpass Zero Wing as well. Due to the increase of each guild's number of experts in the Divine Coliseum, many players had begun changing their opinions of Heaven's Burial and Overwhelming Smile. Although one could not tell much by the number of experts, it could indicate a guild's potential. In the God's domain of today, due to Shifeng repeatedly shattering the concept of strength by numbers, the public no longer evaluated a guild based on how many members it possessed. Then how could one judge a guild's strength? The first method was by examining the guild's raid progression of large-scale team dungeons. This was the best way to judge the comprehensive strength of a guild. The second method was by reviewing the number of experts a guild possessed. At present, passing the fourth floor was the commonly accepted standard for an expert. Very quickly, this matter attracted the attention of the various large guilds in White River City. Originally, Zero Wing had been White River City's sole ruler. Now, however, it would seem that 3 rulers would sit on the city's throne. Heaven's Burial, in particular, was very mysterious. The guild developed as fast as Zero Wing had in the past. Even the famous Ghost Shadow Workshop had joined Heaven's Burial. One could just imagine how powerful the guild's backing was. Previously, Zero Wing had relied on Shifeng to shoulder its success. Now, however, Heaven's Burial's potential was even greater than Zero Wing's. Not only did it possess well-known, top-tier experts, but it also had the financial strength to rival Overwhelming Smile. Heaven's Burial was definitely a powerful competitor. For a time, many players were tempted to take part in Heaven's Burial's entrance examination. Heaven's Burial was constantly recruiting guild members. Moreover, its entry requirements were a lot lower than Zero Wing's. If they joined Heaven's Burial now, by the time the guild grew into its power and became White River City's overlord, their statuses would rise with the tide. It was just like the Zero Wing of today. Currently, even a normal member of Zero Wing was enviable. Zero Wing's guild residence. The members of the main force had gathered in the conference hall after receiving Shifeng's summons. At this moment they discussed events among themselves. Did guild leaders summon us because of the Divine Colosseum? Probably. After all, this is a matter concerning the guild's reputation. Zero Wing is the #1 guild in White River City, yet right now we have fewer experts who have passed the 4th floor than the newly established Heaven's Burial. We have to do something to restore our reputation. How could the Trial Tower's 4th floor be so easy to break through? I am still stuck in the 4th floor's middle sector, not to mention the end. Indeed. Based on what I heard from guild leader, if one cannot display 50% of their actual combat power, they will not be able to overcome the 4th floor. Everyone felt disheartened when they spoke about the Divine Colosseum's Trial Tower. They all were members of Zero Wing's main force and were the envy of ordinary players. In reality, however, they knew that, without breaking through the Trial Tower's 4th floor, they could not be considered as true experts. Despite Zero Wing providing far better resources than Heaven's Burial or Overwhelming Smile, for some reason, only a small number of people had managed to reach the realm of experts. As everyone chatted, Shifeng entered the conference hall, leading Aqua Rose and Fire Dance. The conference hall suddenly fell silent, everyone in the room shifting their gazes towards the black-cloaked Shifeng. Chapter 648, Rapid Improvement. As Shifeng appeared, the atmosphere inside the conference hall became extraordinarily heavy. The benefits that this Zero Wing team enjoyed were far more generous than what Overwhelming Smile and Heaven's Burial offered. Not only had everyone received their own rooms, allowing them to store up the double EXP buff easily, but they also had access to an extravagant number of magic crystals. Each of them received 10 magic crystals each day. This was double what Heaven's Burial's main force received. Yet, in the end, Heaven's Burial had more members reach the 5th floor. If the public learned about the benefits that Zero Wing's main force enjoyed, they would ridicule the team as a bunch of trash. Knowing this, everyone had prepared themselves to receive Shifeng's scolding. Shifeng took his seat on the guild leader's throne. Without saying a word, he took out a cyan wine bottle and placed it on the table. Everyone shifted their gaze to the bottle curiously. The wine bottle's information displayed the name, 100 Berry Wine. It was only a bottle of wine. Guild leader, you're not forcing them to get drunk as a punishment, are you? Aqua Rose could not figure out what Shifeng intended to do. At this moment, rather than admonishing everyone for their arrogance, which had led to their complacency, Shifeng instead revealed a bottle of fine wine. Just what was he trying to do? I am not that extravagant. Shifeng shook his head and laughed. I've prepared this bottle of 100 Berry Wine as a reward. As for the matter regarding Zero Wing's performance falling behind Overwhelming Smile and Heaven's Burial, it had not surprised Shifeng whatsoever. These two guilds were not as simple as they appeared. Both guilds had been recruiting talents from everywhere, not just White River City. In addition, both guilds possessed powerful backgrounds with long histories. Now that these two guilds had familiarized themselves with God's domain, their advantage began to reveal itself. It would still be a while before a newly established guild like Zero Wing would catch up to these two. This was also why first-rate and second-rate guilds looked down on upstart guilds like Zero Wing. Every time a new game came out, many upstart guilds would appear. They rose very quickly and fell very quickly. These newly recognized guilds were like the nouveau riche. How could they possibly compare to the wealthy aristocrats who had been tested over time? Only those capable of withstanding the test of time were able to set foot into this realm. Reward. Everyone curiously stared at the bottle of 100-berry wine on the table. Every player here was a core member of Zero Wing. They would usually have plenty of excess money to spend, and normally they would treat themselves at high-class bars and restaurants. After all, the food and wine that these establishments served were far superior to those in the outside world. It had become a trend for many wealthy prince and princesses to dine at these establishments. However, despite frequently enjoying those delicacies, none of them had ever heard of a wine named the 100-berry wine. Moreover, what could they do with only one bottle of wine? This 100-berry wine can assist you with improving your combat techniques. I doubt any of you will take my word for it, so I intend to allow each of you to test it. Everyone will receive one bottle. When you have reached your limit inside the trial tower, drink the whole bottle. At that time you'll see what I mean, Shifeng laughed. He then took out another 99 bottles from his bag. After this, if any of you want the 100-berry wine again, that will depend on your improvement speed and strength. Once every 3 days I will reward at least one bottle to the top 10 ranking members in the trial tower. The first place will receive 3 bottles, second and third will receive 2 bottles, and the rest will receive 1. The top 10 to improve the most during the 3 days will also be rewarded. At that time, how many bottles you receive will depend on your own ability. Although Shifeng wished to supply everyone with a bottle of 100-berry wine, enabling them to search for that feeling, the wine's production volume was simply too low. He could only offer it to very few of the guild's elites. Guild leader, can this item really improve a person's combat techniques? Aqua Rose also knew quite a bit about God's domain. However, she had never heard of an item capable of improving a player's combat techniques. If the 100-berry wine was truly capable of such a feat, the rest of the team similarly doubted Shifeng's claim. Improving combat techniques was not something that could be done overnight. The process involved a lot of learning and practice. The Divine Colosseum's trial tower also offered suggestions on how to improve one's combat techniques. Although the guidance was minimal, everyone considered it very helpful. You'll find out once you test it. Shifeng smiled, not bothering to explain. Inside the Divine Colosseum. In order to promote their guilds, Heaven's Burial and Overwhelming Smile publicized their battle videos through the screens in the Colosseum's main hall for free. Many players took the time to study these videos. Ah, Zero Wing's members are here. Are they trying to wrestle back their glory? Probably. However, the likelihood of them succeeding is slim. Some time ago, a few more experts from Heaven's Burial and Overwhelming Smile broke through the 4th floor. Currently, Heaven's Burial has 49 people who have reached the 5th floor. The guild even has 8 people who have reached the 6th floor. Their position as White River City's #1 guild is solid now. Meanwhile, Overwhelming Smile is closely following behind, with 45 people who have reached the 5th floor and 6 who have reached the 6th. Both guilds are way above Zero Wing, who only has 39 people on the 5th floor and 4 on the 6th. Many players were not optimistic about Zero Wing's chances. Whether it was the members of the guild's main force or the Dark God's Legion, both had already challenged the trial tower today. I never thought that there would be a moment when Black Flame would panic. However, his actions only bring him more despair. Seated in a room on the 2nd floor, Feng Xianyang quickly noticed Shifeng enter the Divine Colosseum with the other members of Zero Wing's main force. With excitement filling his eyes, he said, "Go, notify Warwolf's team. It's time to show the public who the true ruler of White River City is." Originally, Feng Xianyang had intended to keep Overwhelming Smile's strength hidden for a little while longer. However, after seeing Shifeng personally show up at the Divine Colosseum, he could not suppress the hatred in his heart. Although he could not do anything to Shifeng directly, it would soothe his heart if he could strike a mental blow to Shifeng. As long as Warwolf's team took action, Overwhelming Smile would immediately have a large group of experts pass through the 4th floor. At that time, Zero Wing's efforts to make a comeback would be rendered futile. Its reputation would be in tatters. Meanwhile, the members of Zero Wing's main force, who had just entered the trial tower, felt a burden of expectation. Everyone clearly understood their own combat power. To put it simply, it was extremely difficult for them to break through the 4th floor. However, since Shifeng had told them to give it a try, they could only grit their teeth and follow his commands. Very quickly, the members of Zero Wing's main force passed through one floor after another. Upon reaching the 4th floor, everyone grew anxious. The trial tower's tests were set according to the player's strength. For every test, the system would generate a perfect doppelganger of the challenger. The doppelganger possessed the same combat power as the challenger. However, the doppelganger's actual combat power varied depending on one's progression in the trial tower. Each floor was also divided into 3 stages: early, middle, and late. Through the battles with their own doppelgangers, players could learn their own shortcomings. Meanwhile, players who were capable of defeating the doppelganger during the 4th floor's late stage would basically be able to display 50% of their actual combat power. These players were regarded as experts of God's domain. However, based on the standard of the current players of God's domain and the time they had to develop themselves, very few were capable of reaching the standard of an expert. Hopefully I can pass through the late stage this time, Blackie prayed as watched his doppelganger before him. He then took out the 100-berry wine from his bag and emptied the bottle's contents, swallowing every last drop. Suddenly his mind felt clear. Moreover, his compatibility rate with his weapon and equipment began to rise rapidly. The items felt like an extension of his own body. This is amazing. The others were similarly shocked. After drinking a bottle of 100-berry wine, their perception of the world had undergone a complete change. When everyone casually used a skill, they immediately discovered their skill completion rates had significantly improved. Even Shadow Sword and the others, who had been stuck at around an 80% completion rate, could now easily achieve an 85% skill completion rate, their combat power soaring. After familiarizing themselves with this new sensation, everyone tackled their respective opponents. Chapter 649, The Number 1 Guild's Background. Shortly after Zero Wing's main force entered the trial tower, both Overwhelming Smile and Heaven's Burial simultaneously dispatched a large number of players to challenge the trial tower as well. Due to the competition between these 3 guilds, the originally quiet Divine Coliseum suddenly grew lively. Many players who had returned to the city to rest had quickly made their way to the Divine Coliseum, hoping to witness this competition's outcome and watch the exciting battle videos. Compared to the battle videos of normal PvP battles, these battle videos were far more valuable as references. It was especially true for the battle videos after the 4th floor. This was because the system would specifically display the fighting styles of the various classes, making the battle videos much more instructive. Normally, guilds would not release such instructive battle videos to the public, keeping them for their own members. Some experts would even earn money with their battle videos. Other players would have to pay these experts a fee to watch. Many players who wished to improve themselves usually went for this option. As for those who did not wish to spend money, they would come to the Divine Coliseum to observe the battle videos for free. However, that which one can obtain for free lacked value. One would not learn the truly powerful techniques from a free battle video. As a result, the gap between paying and non-paying players widened, little by little. Meanwhile, the 3 great guilds of White River City occupied themselves with their competition. Although the battle videos these guilds publicized was limited to the 4th floor, it was enough to excite many players. I wonder which guild will obtain first place this time. I'm betting on Heaven's Burial. Of the members of Heaven's Burial I saw going in to challenge the trial tower a moment ago, a few were well-known experts of other virtual reality games. Heaven's Burial really is amazing. It has actually recruited so many experts. It won't be long before they try to claim the seat of White River City's overlord. That's right. Now that Ghost Shadow Workshop has joined Heaven's Burial, the guild's strength has soared by leaps and bounds. Ghost Shadow himself still maintains the highest record in the trial tower. Ghost Shadow indeed deserves to be called one of the virtual gaming world's top-tier experts. Even now, no one else has reached the 7th floor. Moreover, he even reached the middle stage of the 7th floor. I heard that Starmoon City's best record stopped at the 6th floor's middle stage. This is simply madness. I'm an elite member of the Assassin's Alliance, but even until now I am still stuck on the 3rd floor. The 4th floor is still out of my reach. It really makes you wonder just how those experts managed to do it. However, isn't Black Flame Star Moon Kingdom's #1 expert? Did Black Flame fail to reach the 7th floor? I'm not sure. However, Black Flame's name isn't on the trial list. Maybe he hasn't challenged the trial tower yet. Hasn't challenged it yet? He must be afraid of embarrassing himself. If he fails to surpass Ghost Shadow, he will lose his title as Star Moon Kingdom's #1 expert. Everyone grew excited as they examined the trial tower's ranking list. Normally, it was extremely difficult for ordinary players to meet experts like Ghost Shadow. They lived in 2 completely different worlds. Now, not only did they have the chance to see these experts in person, but they also got to watch these famous experts compete against the main force of White River City's #1 guild, Zero Wing. How could they not be excited? Just as everyone chatted about which guild was stronger and which expert was more powerful, something changed on the trial list. Quick! Someone just passed the 4th floor and reached the 5th. A perceptive player quickly discovered the change. There were 2 ranking lists posted in the Divine Coliseum. One was the tournament list, which catered towards PvP battles, while the other was the trial list. Trial list held the names of the players who managed to clear each floor and the name of the guild they belonged to. However, only the top 300 players on each floor would be displayed. For those who cleared the same floor, they would be ranked based on their clear time. However, the clear time held no particular meaning, as everyone only paid attention to the players on the highest floors. Nobody would care about how fast a person could clear the first 3 floors. Meanwhile, as there had yet to be a total of 300 players in White River City who had reached the 5th floor, it was very easy for players to notice a change to the number of players currently on the 5th floor and identify the person responsible for the change. Werewolf? Who is that? Why haven't I heard of him before? Really though, his clear time sure is short. His clear time for the 4th floor is only longer than Ghost Shadow's. I never thought that Overwhelming Smile would have such a powerful expert. If he has cleared the 4th floor so quickly, he should be able to reach the 6th floor. Suddenly, the crowd fell into a heated discussion. In White River City, the players who could reach the 6th floor were as rare as a phoenix's feather. There were less than 20 as of this moment. Moreover, these experts were members of the 3 great guilds. Meanwhile, there was only one person who had managed to reach the 7th floor, and that was the famous Ghost Shadow. 6th floor? Feng Xinyang was filled with disdain when he heard the players chattering downstairs. What does the 6th floor amount to? The #1 spot on the trial list will belong to Overwhelming Smile. A moment later, Werewolf cleared the 5th floor, his name entering the 6th floor's list. The 6th floor's list housed very few people, so a new addition was bound to attract attention. At the same time, 5 more players passed through the 4th floor. Among them, 2 were members of Heaven's Burial, 2 were Overwhelming Smile's members, and the last person was Zero Wings Blackie, who had once ranked #1 on White River City's ranking list. It seems Zero Wing really is crap. 3 more experts from Overwhelming Smile have reached the 5th floor, and 1 has even reached the 6th. As for Heaven's Burial, 2 of their players have passed through the 4th floor as well. On the other hand, despite sending so many people in, only 1 person from Zero Wing has managed to reach the 5th floor. It seems that Zero Wing is no match for the 2 other guilds when it comes to nurturing experts. Everyone made their own judgments upon seeing the obvious differences between the 3 guilds. Ah, Black Flame, do you see now? This is the difference between our guilds. No matter how amazing you are, do you think a guild with the support of only 1 person can surpass a real large guild? Feng Xinyang celebrated as he looked towards the room Feng resided in. Time slowly passed. Suddenly, something inconceivable happened. The 7th floor's list, which originally only had 1 lonely name on it, suddenly had 2. Who is Werewolf? He has actually passed through the 6th floor and entered the 7th floor. This is madness. It would be awesome if he released his battle video. The main hall suddenly exploded with activity. To the majority of current players, the 7th floor was a legend. It was a floor they could never reach. Meanwhile, sitting in one of the rooms on the 2nd floor, Ghost Shadow frowned when he saw this change. So, there's still such an expert in White River City. A hint of excitement flashed in Ghost Shadow's eyes. It was very lonely being an expert of his caliber. It was extremely difficult to find someone to compete with. Throughout White River City, there were only 2 experts who he was interested in. The first was Black Flame while the second was Flame Blood. Now one more had caught his interest, War Wolf. However, while everyone committed War Wolf's name to memory, another name suddenly joined his on the 7th floor's list. Fire Dance. Everyone knew this name, the commander of Zero Wing's main force. Many of Overwhelming Smile's experts had died at her hands. She had even fought valiantly in the Great War with the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, making a name for herself. Nobody would have thought that she would once more appear in the limelight. Sure enough, Zero Wing will not be replaced so easily. Ghost Shadow could not help his elation when he saw another person reach the 7th floor. How is this possible? Feng Xianyang stared at the name on the 7th floor's list in disbelief. Fire Dance, Assassin Affiliated Guild, Zero Wing. No matter how he looked at it, the name belonged to Fire Dance of Zero Wing. However, a short moment later, another new name appeared on the 7th floor's list. Violet Cloud, Cleric Affiliated Guild, Zero Wing. Chapter 650, Breaking the Record. Chapter 650, You Breaking the Record. The appearance of a fourth name on the trial list's 7th floor instantly plunged the Divine Colosseum's main hall into silence. Everyone's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets when they saw Violet Cloud's name. How? Feng Xianyang, who occupied a VIP room, also stared, slack-jawed, having lost his previous calm. He could barely accept Fire Dance reaching the 7th floor. After all, she was the commander of Zero Wing's main force. However, he could not bring himself to accept Violet Cloud's victory. Aside from the difficulty of reaching the 7th floor, just the fact that there were 2 people in Zero Wing capable of this success was shocking. Yet, the second person from Zero Wing to reach the 7th floor was not even a combat class. Instead, she was a cleric, one of the healer classes. It was commonly known that out of the 12 main classes in God's domain, the healer classes possessed the weakest combat power. It was also a lot more difficult for healer classes to advance in the trial tower as most of their skills focused on healing rather than dealing damage. Hence, healers never ranked particularly high in the trial tower. Yet, Violet Cloud, a cleric, had actually managed to reach the 7th floor. However, what everyone did not know was that, in reality, Violet Cloud possessed a hidden class. She was not purely a cleric. Regarding combat capabilities, Violet Cloud was slightly stronger than ordinary combat classes. Moreover, Violet Cloud had a bit more control over her own body than Fire Dance. Since Fire Dance had reached the 7th floor, Violet Cloud would naturally be able to do so as well. One could say that this was expected. When comparing top combat power, it was obvious with a glance which guild was superior. Zero Wing grasped a complete victory. Zero Wing really is the #1 guild. They actually have 2 top-tier experts capable of reaching the 7th floor. If Black Flame also competes, Zero Wing will most likely have 3 people on the 7th floor. Even Overwhelming Smile and Heaven's Burial combined are no match for Zero Wing. But it's still too early to determine anything. Zero Wing has always had many top-tier experts. It is reasonable that they are superior to Heaven's Burial and Overwhelming Smile in this aspect. However, a guild cannot survive by relying on a handful of people. It has to rely on its main force, the guild's backbone. Take a look at Zero Wing's backbone. It is clearly inferior to the other 2 guilds. Zero Wing's potential is still no match for the other 2. We are no longer living in the past. Before, Zero Wing was White River City's absolute overlord. Now, however, just look. The person occupying the top 1 position on the trial list is Heaven's Burial's Ghost Shadow. Zero Wing might not necessarily hold the overlord seat in the future. Many players in the main hall began discussing the matter, and the majority did not have a favorable view of Zero Wing's future. A guild had to depend on a powerful team for support. Even if an individual was stronger, how much of a difference could they make by themselves? Not to mention, Zero Wing had yet to obtain the #1 position on the trial list. Right, this should be Zero Wing's last remaining card. What's there for me worry about? White River City will definitely be mine. Feng Xianyang calmed himself down. He had too much riding on White River City. At this point he had already invested everything he had into White River City. As long as he succeeded, he would become the first heir to his family. After being repeatedly defeated by Zero Wing, it had become an instinct of sorts to worry. However, after calming himself and giving the matter some thought, he realized that he had nothing to worry about. There were only so many experts in Zero Wing. On the other hand, in order to take control of White River City, Underworld had invested blood and sweat and had sent the experts it recruited from all over the virtual gaming world to White River City. With White River City under its control, how could Zero Wing possibly hope to compare with Underworld when it came to recruiting talent? This was only the beginning. Now that Overwhelming Smile had surpassed Zero Wing in terms of their respective guilds' backbones in the future, this gap would only grow. It was only a matter of time before Overwhelming Smile took control of White River City. Time gradually ticked by. Although it had been quite a shock to the spectators that 2 people from Zero Wing had reached the 7th floor, everyone's attention quickly shifted back to the 5th floor's list. To ordinary players, reaching the 7th floor was an impossible dream. The 5th floor, on the other hand, was not completely out of their reach. Hence, they paid more attention to the 5th floor's list. Look, 2 more people from Heaven's Burial have passed. 3 more from Overwhelming Smile have passed as well. Just as everyone was focused on the 5th floor's list, the list suddenly began to change multiple times. What's going on? I'm not seeing things right? Why did more than a dozen names suddenly appear on the list? Wow, it's true. The total number of people on the list was 224. Now it's 242. I wonder which guild or independent players succeeded. Many among the spectators greatly admired the independent experts who had reached the 5th floor. At this point, there were only a few experts in White River City who had reached the 5th floor. If one were an independent expert, large guilds would shower them with invitations and various offers. They would become famous overnight and would no longer have to live an ordinary life. This situation had driven many independent players into a frenzy. It was one of the reasons why so many independent players were desperately challenging the trial tower. Today's mainstream experts were already on the 5th floor. After some more time passed, when these experts reached the 6th floor, it would be far more difficult for independent players to experience such overnight fame. As everyone began searching for the identity of those 18 experts, they suddenly realized that something amiss. Why does it seem like these people are from Zero Wing? This is a lie, right? All 18 people are actually from Zero Wing. None of the spectators dared to believe their own eyes. They immediately began counting the total number of players Zero Wing had on the 5th floor. In the end, they discovered that there were indeed 18 more 5th floor experts in the guild. Instantly, Zero Wing became the guild with the most experts on the trial tower's 5th floor. However, just as they finished counting, another group of experts managed to pass through the 4th floor. This time, the numbers were even more frightening, with a total of 45 people. Moreover, all 45 were members of Zero Wing. Suddenly, the Divine Colosseum fell silent. Just what was this? Nobody in the main hall could make sense of what was happening. In the morning, Zero Wing's main force had challenged the trial tower. At that time, however, not a single person had passed through the 4th floor. Yet now, every single one of them passed. Zero Wing now had a total of 103 people on the trial tower's 5th floor, far ahead of Heaven's Burial and Overwhelming Smile. Impossible. This is not possible. Something must have gone wrong with the trial tower. Feng Xianyang abruptly stood, his eyes bulging as he stared at the trial list. If it were just an additional dozen or so people, he would have, at most, been surprised. However, if every single member of Zero Wing's main force was an expert who passed the 4th floor, the term shock was no longer appropriate. This was simply terrifying. To obtain more experts who could pass through the 4th floor, Feng Xianyang had scoured and poached talents from various other cities. He had also received a continuous supply of experts from Underworld. Yet even so, he still couldn't produce a 100-man team of such experts. What about Zero Wing? Not only was it a guild without any backing whatsoever, but it also lacked a wide array of connections. How did such a guild manage to obtain so many experts? Zero Wing really knows how to hide its strength. Ghost Shadow squinted his eyes at the 5th floor's list. He too felt a heavy pressure weigh on him. There was no longer anybody who dared to look down on Zero Wing. Nobody dared disparage the guild anymore, claiming that its position as White River City's overlord was no longer stable. What a joke. If Zero Wing's entire main force consisted of 5th floor experts, which guild in White River City could contend with it? Not to mention White River City, even in all of Starmoon Kingdom, there was not a single guild that was a match for Zero Wing. However, before everyone could recover from their daze, another change occurred on the trial list's 7th floor. This time, however, there was no addition to the list itself. Instead, the rankings had changed. The lofty and overweening Ghost Shadow, who had stood at the very top of the trial list, had fallen. Moreover, he had fallen not just one but 2 places, taking the 3rd place on the 7th floor. Meanwhile, the 1st and 2nd ranks on the trial tower's 7th floor now belonged to Fire Dance and Violet Cloud, respectively. Chapter 651, Sensational. Chapter 651, Sensational. The floors of the trial tower were divided into 3 stages. For the trial tower's first 4 floors, the difference between each stage was small. However, from the 5th floor onwards, the required combat power would increase significantly with each subsequent stage. Hence, every time a player passed a stage after reaching the 5th floor, they had to undergo a relatively long period of training to proceed further. In the Divine Colosseum, only experts who had passed through the 4th floor would know how difficult it was to overcome each stage from the 5th floor onwards. Not to mention, Fire Dance and Violet Cloud had only recently passed the 6th floor, arriving on the 7th floor. However, of everyone in the Divine Colosseum, the situation shocked Ghost Shadow the most. The record he maintained so far was the middle stage of the 7th floor. In other words, both girls from Zero Wing had at least reached the 7th floor's middle stage and had performed better than he had. He knew full well just how difficult the battles on the 7th floor were. That was no longer a challenge that an ordinary human being could tackle. Not only did the 7th floor have a relatively high requirement of 1 skill completion rate, but more importantly, it also required 1 perfect application, executing skills as if they were executing a normal attack. For example, if an ordinary person and a martial arts master were given identical swords, although the weapons were the same, each person's capabilities with the blade were miles apart. Similarly, the combat power each individual could display was miles apart from each other. In this case, skill completion rate was the weapon. The higher the skill completion rate was, the more power the weapon could display. However, how much of that power was actually displayed still depended on the individual's application. Ghost Shadow recognized himself as one of the top players in the virtual gaming world. He was also a talented individual. After coming into contact with God's domain, he had continuously researched and explored ways to better integrate his skills into his basic attacks, displaying the maximum effect of his skills and eliminating any hindrance in battle. Yet now 2 little girls had surpassed him so quickly. It was inconceivable. Have they been holding back all this time? Ghost Shadow wondered. In fact, Ghost Shadow wasn't the only one with such thoughts. Everyone wondered. There was no other explanation. Something like a breakthrough in the face of a crisis was legendary. It might be a coincidence if it were just one person, but it was impossible for 2 people to encounter such a coincidence at the same time. The effect of the 100-berry wine is really impressive. It's a pity that I can only get my hands on so many bottles. Relaxing in a room, Shifeng nodded and smiled as he watched the trial list. Shifeng was not surprised that every member had managed to pass the 4th floor. After all, that was the system-acknowledged standard for an ordinary expert. After drinking the 100-berry wine, a player's compatibility rate would increase significantly. Normally, the wine was capable of increasing a player's skill completion rate by roughly 10%, though the effects grew weaker as one progressed. However, to Zero Wing's core members whose skill completion rates hovered around 70%, their skill completion rates would increase to 80% or more upon drinking the 100-berry wine. Normally, one would pass through the 4th floor so long as they could maintain a stable skill completion rate of 75%. Hence, it was only natural for everyone to reach the 5th floor. Meanwhile, Fire Dance and Violet Cloud were capable of reaching 85% completion rate with their skills. After drinking the 100-berry wine, their skill completion rates could increase to roughly 90%. Although it was only a meager increase of 5%, the power they could display with their skills would improve by 20% or 30%. The basic requirement for reaching the 7th floor was a skill completion rate of 85%, displaying 100% of a skill's effect. In addition, if one were capable of skillfully applying their skills into their basic attacks, they could normally pass through the 7th floor's early stage. Although Fire Dance and Violet Cloud might still lack actual combat experience and were not proficient with skill application, a skill completion rate of 90% would be sufficient to get them through even the middle stage and pushing them into the 7th floor's late stage. Hence, the fact that the 2 girls had managed to surpass a veteran top-tier expert like Ghost Shadow did not surprise Shifeng at all. If Ghost Shadow could achieve a 90% completion rate with his skills right now, at the very minimum he could set foot on the 8th floor. It's unfortunate that the 100-berry wine only improves a person's combat power temporarily. A person's comprehension depends on the person. Shi Feng sighed as he glanced at the remaining 110 bottles of 100-berry wine in his bag. The 100-berry wine was a strategic tool in nurturing experts. It was no wonder why the fantasy shrine had managed to rise to power so quickly in the past. The 100-berry wine had definitely contributed to this achievement. Shortly after every member of Zero Wing's main force passed through the trial tower's 4th floor, news spread at the speed of light. This reminded everyone just how powerful Zero Wing was. Upon receiving this information, many guilds gave up on their development in White River City, shifting their attention to other cities instead. Against Zero Wing, whose main force consisted entirely of experts who could clear the 4th floor, their guild stood no chance. Rather than wait for their extermination, it would be better for them to develop themselves elsewhere. Who knew? Their chances of achieving success might even be higher somewhere else. Meanwhile, in Heaven's Burial's guild residence. Just how did Zero Wing manage to recruit so many experts? Flame Blood frowned upon receiving news of the Divine Colosseum's latest events. What happened? A short and chubby middle-aged man beside Flame Blood asked in a low tone. Zero Wing just sent its main force to challenge the trial tower. In the end, every member has managed to reach the 5th floor. Among them, 2 have even surpassed Ghost Shadow's record, Flame Blood said, not showing any signs of the arrogance he usually displayed as the commander of Heaven's Burial's main force. On the contrary, he had lowered his posture when he spoke to the chubby middle-aged man. Although the man before Flame Blood was not adept with virtual reality games, the man's position in the real world allowed him to remove Flame Blood from Heaven's Burial easily should he ever wish to. Even the guild leader of Heaven's Burial, Singular Burial, had to treat this middle-aged man with great respect. Interesting. It seems that we won't be able to avoid a confrontation with Zero Wing if we wish to obtain this treasured land, the chubby man said as he caressed his goatee. After a moment of silence he continued, since we can't beat them with numbers, let's improve the guild's overall strength. Flame Blood, notify Ghost Shadow and tell him that I'll send Daybreak Fog to help out. We need to obtain the first clear of a 100-man dungeon as soon as possible. Daybreak Fog. Flame Blood could not help his surprise at the mention of this name. Are we giving up on Starmoon City? Heaven's Burial's ambition was colossal. The guild aimed to control all of Starmoon Kingdom. The best way to do so was to take control of the kingdom's lifeline first, its players. The 2 cities with the largest player population in the kingdom were Starmoon City and White River City. Both also had the largest gathering of elite players. As long as Heaven's Burial took control of these 2 cities, controlling the rest of the kingdom was only a matter of time. Of these 2 cities, Flame Blood spearheaded the White River City takeover, while Starmoon City was spearheaded by Daybreak Fog. If one compared these 2 people's fame, Daybreak Fog was superior. Flame Blood was merely one of the previous year's top 10 newcomers. On the other hand, Daybreak Fog had been one of the top 10 newcomers of the virtual gaming world 2 years ago. Afterward, she had continued to perform magnificently in many virtual reality games. Her fame was only slightly inferior to the snow goddess, Gentle Snow, as she had made her debut roughly 2 years later than Gentle Snow had. In terms of strength, Daybreak Fog ranked 3rd within Heaven's Burial. If they really sent Daybreak Fog to White River City as support, with her strength and her team, Heaven's Burial might actually have a chance of clearing a 100-man team dungeon. After all, during this period, everyone mostly understood the difficulty of a 100-man team dungeon. From the experience of clearing 50-man team dungeons, they had thought up of plenty of strategies. Now all they needed to do was to take action. White River City has become Starmoon Kingdom's business center. The number of elite players migrating to the city increases by the day. Starmoon City is no match in this aspect. Hence, we have to prioritize this side for now. Moreover, when comparing the difficulty of 100-man dungeons, White River Cities is easier. If we allow Zero Wing to continue developing unhindered, it will become impossible to take control of White River City in the future. Suddenly, Shi Feng received a communication request from a friend. Gentle Snow. Chapter 652, Asura Mode Dungeon. Miss Snow, long time no see. You look tired, Shi Feng said, slightly surprised as he saw Gentle Snow's haggard expression through the video chat. Gentle Snow was a well-known superwoman in the virtual gaming world. She also had plenty of capable subordinates under her. After not seeing each other for only a few days, Gentle Snow looked so exhausted. It was surprising. It had been quite a few years since Gentle Snow had made her debut. She should be quite competent at managing a guild by now. In addition, the majority of Ouroboros's elders supported Gentle Snow right now, so managing the guild should not be difficult. I've been busy with guild affairs these past few days, so I haven't gotten much rest. Gentle Snow laughed softly, sweeping the matter under the rug with a single sentence. Inwardly, she envied Shifeng, who could push the majority of guild affairs onto Aqua Rose. Moreover, he only had to focus on White River City. Ouroboros, on the other hand, was competing over dozens of cities, both large and small. However, these cities were still the least of her problems. Starmoon City was the issue. Ouroboros and the Star Alliance had been consolidating their positions in Starmoon City. In addition to several other powerful second-rate guilds, things had become extremely hectic for Gentle Snow. It was especially true for the 3 upstart guilds that had recently appeared in Starmoon City. Cloud9, Inyang Court, Heaven's Burial. All 3 possessed extraordinary backgrounds. They even had multiple guild residences in Starmoon Kingdom's major cities. They were developing as fast as a plague. Among the affected cities, Starmoon City received the greatest impact, and White River City was not far behind. Particularly, the manager of Starmoon City's Heaven's Burial, Daybreak Fog, was far more difficult of an opponent than even Galaxy Past of the Star Alliance. So far, Ouroboros had clashed with Heaven's Burial dozens of times, the battles ranging from small skirmishes to large-scale battles. Although Gentle Snow still held the advantage, Ouroboros did not have only one enemy. Both Cloud9 and the Inyang Court eyed Ouroboros like fresh meat. Ouroboros had already been unstable due to Chao Qinghua's theft of several of the guild's core and elite members. Now, before she could settle the turmoil within the guild, she faced so much trouble. In such a precarious situation, how could set aside time to rest? She had not even upgraded her equipment recently. As Gentle Snow knew that Shifeng disliked playing with words, after their casual greetings she got straight to the point and said, "We have discovered a hidden treasured land near Starmoon City. The area is rich in magic crystals, and I wish to invite Zero Wing to pioneer this treasured land by our side. Are you interested?" Before the Divine Colosseum had been released, magic crystals had not been particularly valuable. Now, however, they were a strategic commodity that every large guild fought over frantically. Although every large guild had a large number of players and was capable of dispatching many teams to raid dungeons each day, team dungeons could only be raided once every 3 days. There were only so many team dungeons available. They could not acquire nearly as many magic crystals as they consumed. Meanwhile, if there was another option, other than team dungeons, for one to obtain magic crystals, this was not an opportunity one could miss. A hidden treasured land? When Shifeng heard these words, the first place that popped up in his mind was the Stoneclaw Mountains. In the past, when Stoneclaw Mountain had been discovered, it incited a great war between every guild in Starmoon Kingdom. The war had been the first kingdom-level war in Starmoon Kingdom. Hundreds of guilds involved themselves, all wanting to get their hands on a share of the profits. That war had caused every guild in Starmoon Kingdom to suffer massive damages. Moreover, Ouroboros and the Star Alliance had even started an all-out war with each other. In the end, taking advantage of the situation, Heaven's Burial, the Inyang Court, Cloud9, and several other second-rate guilds had banded together to form a massive alliance and took over the Stoneclaw Mountains, splitting the profits. Afterward, any players who wished to enter the mountains were required to sign a contract, agreeing to hand over 30% of the magic crystals they harvested. In addition, players were required to pay a fixed fee before they could enter. The various large guilds then split the profits. The Stoneclaw Mountains was a regional dungeon that had formed a space of its own. However, it was not just any dungeon but an Asura mode dungeon. Ordinary team dungeons were divided into 3 difficulties: normal, hard, and hell. However, regional dungeons were divided into 5 difficulties: normal, hard, hell, Asura, and God. The Stoneclaw Mountains existed within the 4th difficulty level of regional dungeons. The dungeon was level 30 to level 49. In other words, only players that were within the range of level 30 to level 49 could enter the dungeon. Unlike team dungeons, however, there was no limit to the number of players who could enter. It was like White Fog Canyon. Inside the dungeon, players could obtain items that were normally unattainable elsewhere. In White Fog Canyon, players could obtain Starfire or that increased the success rate of forging. There was also the Warfire set equipment. Unfortunately, Shifeng had already ruined White Fog Canyon. As of this moment, the level 35 Great Lord, Anubis's gatekeeper, still roamed the map. As a result, no players dared to approach. Meanwhile, White Fog Canyon was merely a hard mode regional dungeon, whereas the Stoneclaw Mountains was an Asura mode regional dungeon. Survival was far more difficult in the Stoneclaw Mountains. However, magic crystals were vastly important. They must be obtained regardless of the sacrifices. Even Zero Wing was no exception to this. Currently, several guilds from Starmoon Kingdom are contesting over the rights of this hidden treasured land. If Zero Wing is willing to help, I can offer 50% of the income. Gentle Snow offered a relatively attractive price. To Gentle Snow, offering 50% of the profits was a big concession on her part. The Stoneclaw Mountains were within the Starmoon City region. It was impossible for Zero Wing to send a large number of players to supervise the map. Hence, the responsibility of supervising the map would fall to Ouroboros. However, Zero Wing possessed extraordinary strength. As of this moment, even Shifeng's strength was a mystery. If Ouroboros and Zero Wing banded together, their chances of coming out on top would be a lot higher. Furthermore, working with other guilds was simply not an option for Ouroboros. Alright, but I have a condition, Shifeng responded after giving it some thought. Zero Wing was based in White River City. There was a limit to how much combat power it could display in the faraway Starmoon City. Even though the guild was powerful, it could not move on the Stoneclaw Mountains by itself. Moreover, it was not realistic for a single guild to monopolize the Stoneclaw Mountains. Tell me. Gentle Snow rolled her eyes at Shifeng. Her offer had already been bountiful, yet Shifeng still had conditions of his own. It's not really a condition. I just need Ouroboros to help me obtain some materials. I'll even purchase them for 20% above market value, Shifeng laughed. He currently had very few of the materials required to construct the stable and teleportation magic array. It would take a long time to gather the necessary materials if he relied on Zero Wing. However, it would be much easier if he used Gentle Snow's connections to purchase the materials because most of these materials could only be obtained by large guilds. It was practically an impossible task for independent players. Yet, even if he tried purchasing these materials, other guilds would only sell them to their allies. Give me the list then. Gentle Snow released a sigh of relief upon hearing Shifeng's condition. She had thought Shifeng intended to take advantage of her current predicament, but it turned out that he still had some humanity left in him. I'll send it to you now. Shifeng then sent a list of the materials required to construct the stable and teleportation magic array to Gentle Snow. You really are daring. Most of these materials are rare drops from large-scale team dungeons. Although my guild can obtain some, 20% above market value is too cheap. I'll need 50% at least. Surprise flashed across Gentle Snow's eyes when she read the list Shifeng had provided. Even if she worked with the Star Alliance, the two guilds could not gather all the materials listed. The cost alone was more than 2,000 gold. Okay, just get them as soon as possible. Shifeng did not care about spending a little more money. If he could get his hands on the materials, he could earn back the money in the blink of an eye. Hearing Shifeng's lack of hesitation, Gentle Snow was slightly shocked. A 50% increase in price would mean more than 3,000 gold. Even to a first-rate guild like Ouroboros, that was a massive amount of money. Yet Shifeng thought nothing of it. After both sides established a contract, Shifeng contacted Aqua Rose and the others, instructing them to gather. The Stoneclaw Mountains could only be dealt with sooner and not later. The earlier they occupied a favorable location, the greater their advantage would be when the war began. Chapter 653, Overall Improvement. Although the Trial Towers competition ended with Zero Wing's victory, the members of Zero Wing's main force were well aware that it had been due to the 100-berry wine. Otherwise, they would not have achieved such frightening results. During the challenge, everyone had discovered many of their own imperfections, their combat power improving slightly as a result. What a pity. If I could experience that kind of feeling once more, I might reach a stable skill completion rate at 87% and pass the stage. After the 100-berry wine's effects dissipated, Fire Dance challenged the 6th floor's late stage again. This time, she passed it without any issues and could now reach the 7th floor with her own power. Unfortunately, she suffered defeat in the 7th floor's early stage. But the 100-berry wine did allow me to gain an initial understanding of how to use void steps. Guild leader will be surprised if he finds out. Void steps was an advanced style of footwork and Shifeng's trademark technique. Just gaining an initial understanding of how to use the skill was extremely difficult. If Shifeng learned that Fire Dance could use void steps, he would definitely be surprised. He had spent many years in order to learn the technique, yet Fire Dance had managed to grasp it in such a short time. Although Shifeng's guidance largely contributed to her success, the fact that she had learned the technique in such a short time certainly had something to do with her innate talent. Return to the residence? Fire Dance muttered as she read the message Aqua Rose had sent to her. She then chose to teleport out of the trial tower. Inside the conference hall of Zero Wings Guild residence. Without wasting time, Shifeng retrieved all of the synthesized Tier 3 gemstones from his bag. All of you equip these Tier 3 gemstones. Shifeng had already replaced all his Tier 2 gemstones with Tier 3 strength attributed gemstones. As a result, his strength attribute had increased by more than 100 points. At this moment, even without activating Heavenly Dragon's power, his strength could match a chieftain of the same level. Even a lord of the same level would struggle to push him back. If the main force replaced their Tier 2 gemstones with Tier 3 gemstones as well, although they would not be as strong as he was, they could still contend with a special elite of the same level. Some, such as Fire Dance and the others who wore a Tier 1 set equipment, might be capable of more. Ordinary players' attributes were inferior to common monsters of the same level. They would only be slightly stronger with a full set of bronze equipment. At that time, the only advantage common monsters would have was their higher HP. If a player was fully equipped with secret silver equipment, their attributes should be roughly equal to an elite monster of the same level. Only when one wore a full set of dark gold equipment would they have the same amount of attributes as a special elite of the same rank. As for Zero Wing's main force, although their equipment was a mix of level 30 fine gold and dark gold equipment, they had the intermediate mana armor kits to make up for the difference. If they embedded Tier 3 gemstones into every item, their attributes should be roughly the same as if they wore a set of level 30 dark gold equipment. None of the main force's members dared to believe their eyes as they stared at the Tier 3 gemstones on the table. Every jaw hit the floor. Aqua Rose was similarly stunned speechless. She knew full well just how valuable Tier 3 gemstones were. Moreover, no one had found a source for these gemstones yet. One could only obtain them from alchemy synthesis. However, synthesizing a Tier 3 gemstone would cost at least 20 gold. Meanwhile, there were over 1,000 shining gemstones on the table. In other words, the gemstones scattered across this table were worth over 20,000 gold at the very least. We're in a hurry, so equip them quickly. Shifeng had already received a status report about the Stoneclaw Mountains. Although things seemed calm on the surface, and the various guilds were busy killing monsters and grinding for magic crystals, the number of guild players gathering in the mountains increased by the minute. Every guild was rapidly mobilizing their forces. Even Stone Forest Town, the closest town to the Stoneclaw Mountains, was surrounded by players. All of these players were members of various large guilds. It seemed that these guilds intended to capture Stone Forest Town. The nearest teleportation array to the Stoneclaw Mountains was over 10 hours on foot. On the other hand, Stone Forest Town was only an hour from the Asura mode dungeon. The town was an absolute treasure. Whether it was for repairing equipment or purchasing consumables, Stone Forest Town was the best option. Otherwise, they would have to waste a day to travel back and forth between Starmoon City and the Stoneclaw Mountains. Meanwhile, Stone Forest Town was not under Starmoon Kingdom's control. Instead, the forces of darkness held it. It was one of the towns that players could capture and occupy. As long as the town fell under a guild's control, said guild could hire an army of NPCs to defend the town for 15 days. Even if every guild in Starmoon Kingdom banded together, they would not be able to do anything to the captured Stone Forest Town. After a guild successfully captured Stone Forest Town, said guild would also receive an additional advantage. They could select a resurrection point. When players died, they would revive in their own cities. Of course, players could also choose to revive at the nearest resurrection point. Meanwhile, Stone Forest Town was the nearest resurrection point to the Stoneclaw Mountains. However, the precondition for reviving in Stone Forest Town was that one needed to capture it. Moreover, only members of the guild that held the town, or those given explicit permission by said guild, could revive there. This would be a huge advantage for capturing the Stoneclaw Mountains in the future. Since Shifeng had learned that the Stoneclaw Mountains had been activated, he would not waste any time. He intended to capture Stone Forest Town with Zero Wing's greatest forces. Unfortunately, other guilds shared the same thoughts. For now though, he needed to occupy a strategic location as quickly as possible. Otherwise their tasks would be far more difficult. A short moment later, every member of the main force had replaced their Tier 2 gemstones with Tier 3 gemstones, their attributes increasing significantly. Following which, Shifeng led the main force and the Dark God's Legion mightily towards the teleportation hall. Wow, what's Zero Wing up to? Whoa, that's so impressive. I'm actually having trouble breathing right now. Is Zero Wing planning to start a war? The players on the streets could not help but wonder when they saw Zero Wing's frightening momentum. Over 400 players, fully equipped with the current best equipment, marched down the street. No matter where this army went, they would be a force to be reckoned with. They could easily trample a large guild. Not to mention, over 100 of these players were experts who had surpassed the 4th floor of the trial tower. If they participated in a field battle, they could easily stand against several thousand elite players. Meanwhile, a single large guild only had several thousand elite players. Suddenly, the various large guilds in White River City began to panic. Although an army of over 400 players seemed small, its strength was no laughing matter. If they wanted to, they could easily obliterate any guild team that was grinding out in the fields. Does Black Flame intend to move against us? Feng Xinyang trembled upon receiving this news. He was so shocked that he nearly jumped out of his seat. But why? We haven't provoked Zero Wing recently. We even yielded a few high-resource areas to them. They shouldn't have any reason to deal with us. Did some fool go and provoke Black Flame again? At this moment, the upper echelons of the various large guilds in White River City felt threatened. Every one of them immediately withdrew from the fields, returning either to White River City or the nearest town as fast as possible. Chapter 654, Town Capturing. Starmoon City, Stone Forest Town. Ever since the Stoneclaw Mountains had been discovered, the upper echelons of the various large guilds had realized the importance of Stone Forest Town. As a result, the various large guilds in Starmoon City had frantically gathered their members around the town. Upon receiving information regarding the Stoneclaw Mountains, large guilds from other cities also mobilized their forces to Stone Forest Town. However, as the teleportation fees were a problem, they could not dispatch too many members. Most of the members they sent were the guild's elites. After arriving at Stone Forest Town, these guilds would send their main forces to the Stoneclaw Mountains to grind for magic crystals, while leaving behind the majority of their elites to stand guard a short distance away from Stone Forest Town to observe other guilds. At this moment, Stone Forest Town was surrounded. There were over 300,000 players watching the town, making the town's resident players quite uncomfortable. These 300,000 plus players were not ordinary players. They all were the elite members of various large guilds. They were stronger than even 3 million ordinary players. If these elites surged into Stone Forest Town at the same time, although the town was protected by level 55 dark NPCs, these NPCs would most likely fall under the fierce assault of so many elite players. The only fortunate advantage that they had was that these elite players belonged to multiple large guilds. They were not united, each guild having their own intentions. And here I thought this was our chance as dark guilds to rise to power. I didn't think that the Starmoon City's guilds would find out about the Stoneclaw Mountains so soon. Now we won't even have a place to level up. What are you worried about? Don't forget that Stone Forest Town has the 3 great leaders. Furthermore, the guilds outside are not united. Unless some guild is looking to get itself killed and benefit the other guilds, they won't invade. You're not exactly wrong, but Starmoon City's first-rate guilds, Ouroboros and the Star Alliance, have dispatched most of their elites already. Of the 300,000 plus elite players out there, over 1/3 belong to those 2 guilds. Even if the other guilds don't make a move, those 2 alone are enough to capture the town. Stone Forest Town's red names discussed their current predicament. They were at a loss on what they should do next. Originally they had simply lived here in peace. When they had nothing better to do, they would kill some players to earn some money or complete some high-level quests. They lived carefree lives. Hence, they had never imagined that such a massive issue would arrive on their doorsteps one day. On a hilltop a short distance away from Stone Forest Town, a group of players quietly observed the town below. These players were uniformly level 30 and wore level 30 fine gold or above equipment. Not far behind these players, there were more than 70,000 players standing at attention. The majority of the players in this army were level 28, with the lowest being level 27. They were 2 or 3 levels higher than the current average level of players. These players were none other than the members of the Star Alliance led by Galaxy Past. Star Alliance was also the guild that had dispatched the most players to Stone Forest Town. An army of 70,000 elite players. This was the strength of a first-rate guild. It was not something a second-rate guild could hope to compete with. Ordinary second-rate guilds would only have over 100,000 members, while a more powerful one would have up to 200,000 or 300,000 players. Of these players, only a maximum of 30,000 or 40,000 would be elite players. After deploying these elites across multiple cities, it would be amazing enough if a second-rate guild could dispatch 20,000 elites for a single expedition. However, compared to a first-rate guild like the Star Alliance, second-rate guilds were not worth mentioning. Guild Leader, I've put together a detailed report on Stone Forest Town with the results from my investigation. There are roughly over 1,000 NPCs in the town, and the majority are level 55 elite guards. There are over 100 level 60 tier 1 NPCs and roughly 30 level 60 tier 2 NPCs. If a fight breaks out, more NPCs might show up. However, the largest challenge of capturing the town will be Stone Forest Town's 3 great leaders. Flourishing Willow, who wore dark blue leather armor, reported softly. Are the 3 great leaders very powerful? Galaxy Past asked. According to the information I obtained from the red names living there, these leaders are only tier 2 NPCs. However, they possessed very high intelligence. They are far more powerful than ordinary tier 2 NPCs regarding combat power. It is especially true for the great leader, Surya. He is a tier 2 professional mage, and I have heard that he knows how to use large-scale destruction spells. Hearing Flourishing Willow mentioning large-scale destruction spells, everyone frowned. Large-scale destruction spells were Zerg Tactics' Achilles' heel. Moreover, a high-intelligence NPC's combat techniques were far more powerful than ordinary players. Based on the settings of God's domain, Surya should be capable of displaying more than 50% of his actual combat power. In other words, he was at least as skilled as an ordinary expert. If a player possessed the attributes of a level 60 tier 2 NPC and large-scale destruction spells, said player would be a natural disaster to the current players of God's domain. Right, I've also received news that White River City Zero Wing has sent people over. It seems that they have designs on this area as well, Flourishing Willow said. Zero Wing? Galaxy Past laughed. This is the Star Alliance's home ground. Do they think that they can just show up and take a slice of the pie as well? Zero Wing was indeed powerful. However, that was limited to White River City. Stone Forest Town was in the Starmoon City region. How many people could Zero Wing possibly dispatch? Moreover, the ordinary guards one hired could not be used in the fields. Only personal guards could be used. On the off chance that a personal guard died, it would be extremely difficult to revive them. Hence, players would not use their personal guards casually. Even if Zero Wing sent its personal guards, their impact would be minimal. Ignore them. Since we can't capture Stone Forest Town in a short time, have the main force grind for magic crystals for now. However, we can't let Ouroboros relax either. Look for opportunities to kill some of its members. After all, the Stoneclaw Mountains still belong to our 2 guilds. Galaxy Pass smiled lightly. It truly is fortunate that Chao Qinghua stole a large number of experts and elite players from Ouroboros. The Stoneclaw Mountains will belong to the Star Alliance. In Starmoon City, the Star Alliance had far more experts and elite players than Ouroboros. Currently, Ouroboros barely held on. As for the other guilds in Starmoon City, they were nothing to the Star Alliance. At this moment, many guilds that had completed their investigation of Stone Forest Town had decided to give up on the idea of capturing the town. Instead, they shifted their focus towards grinding for magic crystals in the Stoneclaw Mountains. However, as the majority of their elite members had yet to reach level 30 and could not enter the Stoneclaw Mountains, these elite members were tasked with leveling up as fast as possible. Meanwhile, at Ouroboros' base camp, Shifeng had just arrived with his team. Very quickly, Shifeng's group became the center of attention. The group was simply too impressive. Not only were the members of Zero Wing's main force uniformly level 30, but many in the Dark Gods Legion were also level 30. In addition, the most inferior piece of equipment worn by the group was fine gold rank. Most importantly, every member's aura inflicted a deep fear. They felt like a group of primordial beasts. Even those standing quite a distance away could not help but tremble when they glanced at this group of players. This is Zero Wing. Sure enough, their reputation is well deserved. Zero Wing is simply too powerful. We don't even have so much top-tier equipment. The members of Ouroboros could not help discuss Zero Wing's members. Meanwhile, when Gentle Snow emerged to welcome Shifeng and the others, she was similarly surprised. How did Zero Wing manage to recruit so many experts? Gentle Snow could clearly feel that among the 400 players Shifeng had brought with him, many radiated an intense pressure. There were even a dozen or so people who felt extremely dangerous. Although she had been busy settling the guild's internal affairs, she had not fallen behind or neglected her own development. Throughout Star Moon City, extremely few players were capable of making her feel nervous. There were even fewer experts who felt dangerous to her. Star Moon City should only contain a handful of such experts. Yet, Zero Wing had over a dozen such people. It was simply inconceivable. Chapter 655, Flame Shaman. It had been a relatively long time since God's Domain launched. During this period, even an ordinary player's sensitivity towards danger had increased significantly, not to mention experts. Many a time, experts of God's Domain would not judge an opponent's strength based solely on the other party's weapons and equipment. They also judged their opponent's strength based on the degree of danger they felt from their opponents. An expert's combat power was not limited to their weapons and equipment. Combat techniques and powerful skills also affected a person's combat power. These were hidden aspects not visible until combat. Hence, one had to rely on intuition to judge a person's strength. Gentle Snow was very confident of her own perception because up until this day, her intuition had never failed her. It reminded her of her first encounter Yifeng. Although Yifeng's equipment had been pathetic, his level had been very low, and he had not felt threatening in the least. Her intuition had told her that Shifeng was extraordinary. And indeed, her intuition had not been wrong. Time had proven that Shifeng was truly extraordinary. Meanwhile, Gentle Snow's intuition currently told her that the group of people in front of her was very deadly. They were not as simple as they appeared. It felt as if every single player had a ferocious beast hidden inside their bodies. Only these beasts had yet to expose their true nature. Zero Wing is growing more mysterious by the minute. Gentle Snow laughed bitterly as she subtly examined the crowd from Zero Wing. In the past, Zero Wing had been no more than a small, weak guild, yet, before anyone realized it, the guild had grown into a towering existence. Even Ouroboros had to treat Zero Wing seriously. Fortunately, their two guilds had long since formed an alliance. Otherwise, Zero Wing would be a formidable enemy. "Let's talk inside," Gentle Snow said as she led the way to a large tent. Shifeng nodded and entered the tent with Aqua Rose and Fire Dance. During God's Domain's early stages, players only had needed to travel for a short time to arrive at their destination. However, as players reached higher levels, the time they spent on travel increased. When going out to the fields to level up, it was typical for players to not return to their respective cities for several days. Meanwhile, when players wished to rest, they could rely on these field tents. HP and mana would recover quickly when consuming food and beverages. However, concentration and stamina would not. Generally, players had to return to a city to rest and recover. With a field tent, however, there was no need to do so. Although the recovery speed while inside a tent could not compare to resting in a city, it was sufficient. Only ordinary players could not afford a field tent. Just an ordinary 6-man tent sold for 10 gold at NPC shops, not to mention 20-man, 50-man, or 100-man tents. Not only did one need enough money to purchase a 100-man tent, but they also needed a certain amount of reputation. The large tent before them was a 100-man tent, and it had cost 200 gold. If one had sufficiently high reputation, they could receive a small discount. However, even then, a 100-man tent would still cost more than 150 gold. Inside, the tent looked like a guild residence's conference hall. Currently, more than a dozen people sat inside the tent, and every one of them was a member of Ouroboros's upper echelon. They were uniformly level 30, and their equipment was among the best one could find. Meanwhile, the beautiful and vibrant Zhao Yueru relaxed amongst these players, currently dressed in white and red luxurious mage robes. In her hand she wielded a red jade staff covered in runes. Looking at the faint red glow that surrounded the staff, one could immediately tell it was an extraordinary item. Furthermore, a faint flame-red aura surrounded the caster. She looked like a goddess of fire. Flame Shaman? Shi Feng concealed his surprise when he saw Zhao Yueru, who had undergone a massive change since the last time they met. Flame Shaman was a hidden class, and its legacy rank was similar to the Astromancer. It was considered an advanced legacy. As the name suggested, it was a class that specialized in controlling flames. However, a Flame Shaman was not as balanced as an Elementalist. The class specialized in attacking and destroying everything. In terms of damage output, the class was far superior to an Astromancer. It was an extremely violent class. In the past, Zhao Yueru's fame had only started to soar after she class changed into a Flame Shaman. The public had known her as the Flame Witch. Shi Feng never imagined that Zhao Yueru would become a Flame Shaman so quickly. Even against an MT of the same level geared with top-tier equipment, a Flame Shaman could finish them off in 2 or 3 moves. A Flame Shaman could practically one-shot an ordinary MT. However, although the class's damage was astounding, it was also because of this that Flame Shamans had very few survival and life-saving abilities. In dungeons and team battles though, they were beyond scary. They were practically Tomahawk cruise missiles. After sweeping a glance over everyone present, Shi Feng understood the general situation regarding Ouroboros' top combat power. Although Ouroboros had lost many of its top combatants, the guild was still much stronger than second-rate guilds with its remaining forces. "This is the data we collected on Stone Forest Town," Gentle Snow said as she handed Shi Feng a folder. Slowly she explained, "Currently, every guild is trying to occupy the town. However, the town is strong enough to avoid capture even if we combine our guild strengths. I suggest that we strike at the Stoneclaw Mountains first, harvesting magic crystals and building our strength. With both of our guild's experts, we should be able to occupy the high-resource areas within the mountains quickly. We can then use the opportunity to widen the gap between us and the other guilds. Currently, nobody could do strike against Stone Forest Town. The best option right now was to accumulate their strength. This was also why Gentle Snow had asked for Zero Wing's help. There is no need to go through all that trouble. We can just capture Stone Forest Town. Once we occupy the town, it will be simple to obtain the rights over the Stoneclaw Mountains," Shi Feng said, shaking his head. He did not agree with Gentle Snow's idea. In the past, it was precisely such thinking that had led to the various large guilds ending in a deadlock with each other. As a result, more guilds had involved themselves in the situation in the Stoneclaw Mountains. Once that happened, they would lose the chance to capture Stone Forest Town. At this moment, the various large guilds were still helpless against Stone Forest Town, so they would focus their attention on the Stoneclaw Mountains. This was the best chance to capture Stone Forest Town. Otherwise, if time dragged on, the number of guilds in the area would increase. At that time, the number of experts who were interested in this area would also increase, and their chances of capturing Stone Forest Town would decrease. Hearing Shi Feng's resolve, Gentle Snow was momentarily stunned. That was suicide. Immediately she explained, "You should have seen the information regarding the 3 great leaders for yourself. All 3 are high-intelligence NPCs. They are equivalent to expert players who have reached the 5th floor. They also possess large-scale destruction spells. Furthermore, if we attack Stone Forest Town, the other guilds will not sit by and do nothing. They will take advantage of the situation and try to annihilate us. What if we don't give them the chance?" Shi Feng smiled confidently. On his way here, Shi Feng had considered the matter of Stone Forest Town extensively. It was extremely difficult to deal with the 3 great leaders. Not to mention they would have to give the other guilds the slip. However, there was a simpler method of capturing Stone Forest Town. Chapter 656, Crazy Decision. Don't give them the chance? Gentle Snow grew curious. There were over 300,000 guild elites stationed close to Stone Forest Town. Of them, 70,000 belonged to the Star Alliance while Ouroboros only had 50,000. Even if both first-rate guilds banded together, they still wouldn't be able to do anything to the other guilds. Hence, every guild was maintaining this temporary peace. Nobody dared provoke anybody else. However, if a guild decided to attack Stone Forest Town, so much commotion would attract the other guild's attention. At that time, no one would not sit by and let someone else capture the town. The other guilds would definitely work together to exterminate the mutual enemy. Because of this, even Star Alliance, with its numerical advantage, would not dare to take action. Now, however, Shifeng insisted that they attack Stone Forest Town without giving the other guilds the opportunity to retaliate. How would that even be possible? There were level 55 and level 60 NPCs defending the town. Among them there were even tier 2 NPCs. A level 60 tier 2 NPC was even stronger than a level 30 Great Lord. Not to mention there was more than just one level 60 tier 2 NPC defending the town. The great leader Surya, who wielded large-scale destruction spells, also defended the town. With Ouroboros's 50,000 elites, it would be a bitter battle to capture Stone Forest Town. There was also no certainty that they would succeed. Yes, don't give them the chance, Shifeng nodded as he repeated himself. When the time comes, everyone needs to dispose of the town's NPCs as quickly as possible and leave the rest to me. Shifeng had conquered many towns in the past, so he was quite familiar with the method. It was not an easy task for a guild to gain control of a town. First, players had to dispose of every NPC within the town. Leaving even one NPC alive would result in failure. Second, players had to obtain the town token that the leader of the town guarded. After completing these two tasks, one would obtain the authority to rule over the town. Hence, it was extremely difficult to capture a town with a large number of competitors nearby. In the past, after the Stoneclaw Mountain's profits had been distributed, no guild bothered with capturing Stone Forest Town. However, things were slightly different in this life. Currently, various large guilds' main forces and elite members had gathered near the Stoneclaw Mountains, making this the perfect opportunity to capture Stone Forest Town. However, they only had a small time frame to do so, as it took less than 2 hours to travel from the Stoneclaw Mountains to Stone Forest Town on foot or 30 minutes on a mount. Fortunately, no one had reached level 40 yet. Are you planning to hold off all of those guilds by yourself? Gentle Snow asked, flabbergasted. She highly doubted that Shifeng could achieve this feat. They were talking about more than 250,000 elite players. How could one person possibly hold off that many players? Shifeng's words stupefied everyone else in the tent as well. Although they had long since realized that Shifeng was crazy, they had not thought that he was this crazy. Sitting beside Shifeng, Fire Dance and Aqua Rose were similarly shocked. Shortly after, however, they both smiled bitterly. Although they had no doubts that Shifeng could escape the clutches of 250,000 elite players, no matter how they racked their brains, it was impossible to fend off 250,000 elite players, preventing this army from harassing them while they attacked Stone Forest Town. Yet, Shifeng had never once failed to keep his word, regardless of how insane his claim sounded. He would never give his word if he were not confident of keeping it. One man holding off 250,000 elite players. Just thinking about it gave them goosebumps. Relax, it'll be fine. However, whether or not we succeed will depend on how fast you can clear the NPCs in the town, Shifeng said confidently. Following which, Shifeng gave Fire Dance and Aqua Rose their respective orders. In the upcoming battle, Fire Dance was tasked with leading the main force, while Aqua Rose was tasked with leading the Dark God's Legion. As for Gentle Snow and the others, they still hesitated to make a decision. Snow, are we really going to do this? You know how insane this is, right? Zhao Yueru asked softly. Gentle Snow took a deep breath. In the next moment, cold determination flashed in her eyes as she said, "We have no other options. The Star Alliance grows stronger by the day. Other guilds constantly harass us as well. At this rate, the Star Alliance will overtake us." Afterward, Gentle Snow began organizing her guild's forces, preparing for battle. Shifeng, however, was in no hurry. First, he investigated the various large guilds, particularly their main forces. Before they took action, Shifeng used the Bible of Darkness to summon a Tier 2 demon. 3 hours later, Shifeng summoned another Tier 2 demon. The two level 35 Tier 2 demons were as large as small hills. Tier 2 demons were the equivalent of Lord-ranked monsters. It was quite reassuring to have two level 35 lords on their side. I never imagined that Black Flame would have something like this. It's no wonder he was so confident of fending off the other guilds. Gentle Snow was stunned when she saw the two powerful Tier 2 demons. Even a 100-man team could deal with an ordinary Tier 2 demon, although they might struggle. However, a Tier 2 demon under a player's control was far more terrifying. It could annihilate even a 1,000-man elite team. If two Tier 2 demons banded together, their impact would be multiplied several folds. With these two Tier 2 demons, Shifeng could successfully delay the other guilds for some time. Just as Zero Wing and Ouroboros were about to mobilize their forces, the various large guilds received news of this matter. The various large guilds each had their own information network. With Ouroboros mobilizing such a large army, how could news of it escape the eyes and ears of the various large guilds? Has Gentle Snow gone mad? She really believed Black Flame? Does she think Black Flame is a god that can fend off an army of 250,000 players? Galaxy Past, who was currently in the Stoneclaw Mountains, laughed madly when he received this information. Notify the others immediately. If Ouroboros dares attack Stone Forest Town, find an opportunity to strike. Galaxy Past wasn't the only person with such thoughts. The other guild leaders similarly thought that Gentle Snow had lost her mind. Black Flame was similarly insane. Did he really think that their guild's elite members were blockheads that would just stand by and die for him? If all 250,000 players worked together, the ranged attacks alone could kill a lord of the same level instantly, not to mention a player. Suddenly, the various large guilds surrounding Stone Forest Town began mobilizing their forces, preparing to take action at a moment's notice. Now all that was left was for Ouroboros and Zero Wing to move. As for the various large guilds' main forces and elite members, they all continued grinding for magic crystals in the Stoneclaw Mountains. News sure flies. However, this isn't too bad either. It would have bothered me if they didn't make a move, Shifeng chuckled. He then activated the aura of Wind's Wind Rider, transforming into a blur as he flew to Stone Forest Town. What is he trying to do? Gentle Snow muttered in confusion. Shifeng's actions even confused Fire Dance and Aqua Rose as Shifeng had not revealed his true plans. Let's begin then. Shifeng grinned. Immediately he swapped the aura of wind for the aura of fire. He then cast Firestorm on Stone Forest Town's NPC stronghold. Suddenly, flames engulfed the third and highest floor of the stronghold. Some nearby players turned to ash instantly. As for the NPCs inside the stronghold, they sustained heavy damage as well. In the blink of an eye, the stronghold's third floor was nothing more than scorched ruins. The crowd watching from afar was stupefied. Shifeng had actually attacked the NPC stronghold by himself. He was seeking death. At this moment, a white-haired old man in black robes emerged from the ruins. This old man was Surya, a level 60 Tier 2 NPC. Looking at Shifeng, Surya shouted angrily saying, "Intruder! You actually dare to provoke me? I will show you how terrifying it is to anger a mage." Surya, Great Leader, Professional Mage. Level 60. HP 5, 500, 000/5, 500, 000. In addition, two NPCs with imposing auras stood beside Surya, and they were the second leader, Lime, and third leader, Pato. Lime, second leader, Sword Master. Level 60. HP 6, 500, 000/6, 500, 000. Pato, third leader, Berserker Master. Level 60. HP 7, 000/7, 000/000. Shifeng's Firestorm had only dealt around -80,000 damage to the three leaders, a meager amount comparing to the millions of HP they possessed. However, their stronghold's destruction was what truly infuriated the three leaders. At this moment, the three leaders glared at Shifeng, their eyes containing the promise of a painful death. Laughing, Shifeng turned and flew away. Nobody can escape our fury. Surya and the other two leaders summoned their mounts and chased after Shifeng. The difference between having a mount and not having a mount was massive. Despite Shifeng having activated Wind Rider, the three NPCs caught up with him very quickly. Shit, they're heading towards us. The spectating guilds quickly noticed that something was off as Shifeng flew towards them. Wind Rider only had a short duration of 24 seconds. Shifeng could cover just enough distance in that time to land right in the middle of the various large guilds. At this moment, Surya, who rode his horse, drew line after line of runes in the air. He then flicked his finger and suddenly, thunderclouds began to condensing above the army of players. Turn to ash. Surya revealed a sinister smile as he cast the Tier 2 spell Lightning Storm on Shifeng's location. Chapter 657 Pits of Despair. Hearing the rolling thunder above him, Shi Feng activated Defensive Blade. He then dashed towards the largest crowd. Although the Tier 2 spell Lightning Storm was not a large-scale destruction spell that dealt ridiculously high damage, the spell covered a very wide area, up to a radius of 100 yards. After the Tier 2 professional mage had chanted the spell's full incantation, even Shi Feng could not withstand or evade the attack. Hurry! Get rid of Black Flame. The upper echelons of the various large guilds saw through Shi Feng's ploy. He intended to kill them with a borrowed sword. Hence, as long as they killed Shi Feng first, their problems would be solved. However, Shi Feng's attributes were far above the standard of current players. Even the strongest powerhouses of the various guilds could not compete with Shi Feng in terms of basic attributes. Moreover, as Shi Feng had buried himself in the crowd, nobody dared to launch casual attacks. It was especially true for the ranged classes. It would be very easy for their attacks to hit their allies. Only the melee classes could attempt to pin Shi Feng down. However, could elite players possibly predict Shi Feng's actions? Moreover, Shi Feng was extremely cunning as he dashed towards the healers. Hurry up, use control skills. Don't worry about friendly fire. The upper echelons hurriedly commanded. As the magical classes began chanting their spells, the thunderclouds in the sky reached their climax. In the next moment, blue lightning descended from the sky. For a moment, it looked as if the end of the world were upon them as bright lightning and booming thunder took over the field. When the lightning strikes stopped, silence fell. Everyone was stupefied. All players that were within spell's range had received over -5,000 damage each time the lightning descended. After more than a dozen lightning strikes, even the high HP MTs who had activated Shield Wall and such life-saving skills gave up the ghost. Meanwhile, with his extreme speed, Shi Feng managed to escape Suria's lightning storm after receiving a couple of lightning strikes. Everyone else, however, met a tragic end. In order to deal with Zero Wing and Ouroboros, the various large guilds had prepared and gathered together. Shi Feng just so happened to land in the middle of that crowd. After the lightning storm ended, nobody within the spell's effective radius of 100 yards had lived. Instead, only weapons and equipment occupied the space. This scene caused witnesses to gasp and shiver. Is this the power of a Tier 2 NPC mage? Gentle Snow's expression turned grim as she looked at the hollowed, scorched area that had previously held a sea of people. Previously, Gentle Snow had thought it was feasible to capture Stone Forest Town with only 50,000 elite players if they did not have to worry about the other guilds' harassment. After watching this, however, even if they had an army several times larger, capturing the town was utterly impossible. From a rough estimate, around 8,000 people must have died from that single spell. When Suria saw that Shi Feng was still alive, unharmed even, a cold glint flashed in his eyes. He then began chanting another Tier 2 spell. Meanwhile, the two other leaders of Stone Forest Town began to massacre the players before them as they charged towards Shi Feng. Against level 28 and level 29 elite players, the two level 60 Tier 2 NPCs only needed one hit to end their lives. The two NPCs were like meat grinders as they butchered the various guilds' elites. As for Shi Feng, he did not bother putting up a heroic fight against the NPCs. Instead, he simply turned around and fled, running to the highest concentration of players. Not only could he reduce the number of enemies this way, but he could also utilize the elite players to pin down the three great leaders, giving him more time to escape with his life. The strength of level 60 Tier 2 NPCs with high intelligence was no laughing matter. Even a level 35 Great Lord would not be a match for these NPCs. Otherwise, the various large guilds would not have hesitated to capture the town. Black Flame, are you trying to make an enemy of every guild here? An upper echelon from one of the guilds shouted, veins popping from anger. Everyone had already witnessed the three great leaders' strength. If they did not stop Shi Feng, their guilds would suffer tremendous losses. The guild members that had accompanied them were not normal members. These members were their guild's foundations. If even a fraction of these players died, it would set their guilds back tremendously, not to mention if they lost half or even 3/4. Losing half or more of their members would deal an irrecoverable blow. Black Flame, even if Zero Wing is more powerful, your guild will pay if you oppose every guild present. We can still negotiate for peace if you stop now. Don't make the wrong decision here. Watching the slaughter of their guild members, the upper echelons of the various large guilds tried their best to stop Shi Feng. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. Shifeng was simply too fast. Their guild's experts were currently grinding in the faraway Stone Claw Mountains. With just their elite members present, they could not pin down Shifeng. Sure, don't say I never gave you a chance. Instruct your guild leaders sign a contract stating that your guilds will no longer meddle with matters pertaining to Stone Forest Town immediately, Shifeng replied. Black Flame, don't go overboard. If you don't stop now, don't blame us for taking action against Zero Wing's members. Walk away from Stone Forest Town? Even without reporting Shifeng's demands to their higher-ups, they knew it was impossible. If Zero Wing and Ouroboros occupied a strategic location like Stone Forest Town, it would only be a matter of time before the Stone Claw Mountains would fell their hands as well. Hence, they could not agree to this condition. At this point, none of the large guilds dared to strike the three great leaders in fear of shifting the NPC's aggro towards themselves. As for having their members scatter and flee, although they could reduce their losses by doing so, once scattered they would no longer be a threat to Ouroboros and Zero Wing. However, dealing with Zero Wing's 400 members would be a piece of cake for their armies. Even Shifeng could not save his allies. At that time, both sides would end in mutual destruction, with neither side obtaining any benefits. What a pity. You leave me with no choice then. Shifeng then proceeded to dash towards the next crowd of players. You will regret this. The upper echelons of the various guilds had never imagined that Shifeng would be so decisive and unafraid of their mutual destruction. At this moment, the guild leaders of the various guilds who currently resided in the faraway Stoneclaw Mountains had received news of the attack. Black Flame has truly lost his mind this time. He actually dares to declare war against all of our guilds. Since he wants to play, let's play. Tell them to send a small detachment to take out Black Flame. Everyone else is to split up and delay Ouroboros and Zero Wing as much as possible. I doubt that Black Flame will lead the three great leaders towards his own allies. Galaxy Past laughed. Immediately he commanded, everyone retreat from the Stoneclaw Mountains and hurry to Stone Forest Town. Also contact the other guild leaders. I want to show Black Flame and Gentle Snow that they are doing nothing more than digging their own graves. Before this occurred, the Star Alliance and Ouroboros had both been intimidating guilds. Hence, none of the other guilds would have worked with either one of them. Now, however, the situation changed as Ouroboros actively stirred up trouble. The nail that stuck out would be hammered down. If the Star Alliance could band together with the other guilds to deal with Ouroboros, not only could they obliterate Ouroboros in one fell swoop, but it would also have a better chance of obtaining Stone Forest Town. After all, within the Star Moon Kingdom, no other guild could possibly stand against the Star Alliance. Once Ouroboros was gone, the Star Alliance's word would become law. A short moment later, sure enough, the guild leaders of the various large guilds had formed an alliance with the Star Alliance to deal with both Ouroboros and Zero Wing. After the various large guilds surrounding Stone Forest Town banded together, according to Galaxy Past's plans, they sent out a force of 80,000 players to suppress Ouroboros and Zero Wing. As for the remaining forces, they scattered and circled the town, preventing anyone from escaping. Black Flame, it's too late. Today we'll teach you the consequences for antagonizing the masses. The upper echelons of the various guilds directed their members to suppress Ouroboros and Zero Wing. Even if the three great leaders were more powerful, with everyone spreading out, even if the NPCs had free reign, they would only kill a limited number. Against an army of 250,000, that number would only be a drop in the bucket. Meanwhile, the various large guilds had forced Ouroboros and Zero Wing into a corner. It was extremely easy for an army of 250,000 elites to suppress 50,000 elites. Not to mention the experts of each respective guild were on their way. When their main forces arrived, Ouroboros and Zero Wing would be finished. They've banded together as expected. Shifeng frowned. However, he just shook his head and laughed. Since you want to go for mutual destruction, I'll show you the pits of despair. The three great leaders protecting Stone Forest Town had not revealed all of their strength. Stone Forest Town was in such close proximity to the Stoneclaw Mountains. With the massive benefits from the mountains, how could Stone Forest Town possibly be an ordinary town? Chapter 658, Nightmare Descents. Aqua, lead everyone away from the town immediately, Shifeng said through a whisper. Understood. Aqua Rose was slightly stunned by this command. Originally, she had thought Shifeng would use Zero Wing's trump card. She had not expected him to order a retreat and give up on Stone Forest Town. However, since Shifeng had given the command, Aqua Rose had no choice but to lead everyone away. Gentle Snow's army similarly retreated. Throughout Starmoon Kingdom, there was not a single guild that could stand against an army of 250,000 elite players. If they continued fighting, only death awaited them. In truth, though, even if they did fight, their enemy would not leave unscathed either. Both sides would be destroyed. In terms of equipment, Zero Wing's main force was far superior to the other guild's experts, not to mention their elite players. After the main force had swapped out their Tier 2 gemstones for Tier 3 gemstones, their attributes were simply overwhelming. In addition, there were currently no enemy experts to pin them down. As a result, the Zero Wing's main force swept like a scythe across the enemy forces, leaving only devastation in its wake. Spell after spell bombarded Kola, Yiwumian, and Turtledove, who stood at the forefront of the team. However, these spells had not even tickled the 3 MTs. Even the most powerful attack only dealt slightly over -1,000 damage. However, all 3 MTs had over 10,000 HP each. Moreover, the majority of their enemies' attacks had not even landed. These MTs only needed a single heal to recover to full HP. There were also the 2 Tier 2 demons. Both Tier 2 demons were melee fighters with over 3 million HP each. Under Shifeng's control, both demons were like gods of destruction. The 2 demons were unstoppable as they targeted the enemy healers. Also, although Shifeng could not control the 2 demons perfectly, he could maneuver them to avoid as many attacks as possible. In terms of basic attributes, the 2 level 35 Tier 2 demons were much stronger than even Shifeng. Even their strength was superior to Shifeng's, who wore Tier 3 strength-attributed gemstones. So, how could ordinary players hope to touch them? Only if everyone concentrated their attacks on the 2 demons and sealed off their escape routes would the 2 demons receive some form of damage. However, with Zero Wing's healers and the demons' innate battle recovery, they could very quickly recover the lost HP. Against the 2 Tier 2 demons' assault, the various large guilds suffered scores of deaths with every passing second. After only a few minutes of battle, the coalition of guilds had lost nearly 7,000 elite players. Zero Wing claimed just as many lives as the 3 great leaders. The members of the various large guilds felt like a knife had been plunged into their hearts as they watched. Without any of their guild's experts, they were helpless against a team like this. This was also why the various large guilds were desperately trying to nurture experts and frantically fighting over the Stoneclaw Mountains. The only consolation was that Ouroboros suffered similar losses. Since the battle had begun, Ouroboros had lost over 2,000 members. As both sides watched their companions die, an intense fighting spirit began to fill their hearts. At this moment, the area around Stone Forest Town was like an ancient battlefield. Meanwhile, the red names in Stone Forest Town were dumbfounded. Players were killing each other all over the place. There were players dying every second. Even experts would be insignificant in a war of this scale. In comparison, their kill counts were a joke. While Ouroboros and Zero Wing retreated from Stone Forest Town, Shifeng activated Windwalk and crushed a speed scroll as he dashed towards the town. Meanwhile, the 3 great leaders followed closely behind. Ah! Black Flame is finally scared. Too bad that it's too late for regrets. Brothers, charge. Don't let anyone from Ouroboros or Zero Wing get away. With the Star Alliance taking the lead, the other guilds enthusiastically chased after Ouroboros and Zero Wing's remaining members. However, as the 2 guilds charged at the enemy encirclement, everyone finally witnessed Zero Wing's strength. With just 400 members, Zero Wing had easily torn apart the encirclement of over 10,000 players. Casting stars of light, over 1,000 players died by Blackie's hand in the blink of an eye. As for Fire Dance, she was like a ferocious beast as she charged into the enemy crowd. With a swing of her short swords, she easily sent players flying and dispersed the crowd. There was even less need to mention the strength-based classes like Kola and Rampant Blade. Crashing into the enemy front lines with his shield, Kola easily sent 5 level 28 and level 29 MTs flying, damages of over -1,000 points appearing above the enemy players' heads. After absorbing an accumulated damage of 5,000 points, he then activated Blue Fire Shield, causing 150% damage to an area of 3 by 10 yards in front of him. The enemy players before him lost over half of their HP. As for Rampant Blade, he brandished his blue fire double-edged sword, killing an enemy player with each hit. From time to time he would also trigger the blue fire dance, instantly wiping out a group of elites. However, when it came to group killing capabilities, Aqua Rose was the strongest of them all. Not only was she a glass cannon, but she also had the blue fire heart. She could summon 3 elite-ranked blue fire crows to assist her in battle. Although the blue fire crows were only elite-ranked and were the same level as Aqua Rose, level 30, their attack power would increase based on Aqua Rose's intelligence attribute. Meanwhile, Aqua Rose currently wore a complete Tier 1 set equipment. In addition, she was also fully equipped with Tier 3 gemstones. Her total intelligence was over 400 points. Overall, each elite-ranked blue fire crow could rival a special elite of the same level. However, the blue fire crow's most impressive aspect was their growth skill. 1 minute after the blue fire crows had been summoned, they could grow from elites to special elites. After 5 minutes they would become chieftains. After 10 minutes they would become lords. After 18 minutes they would become high lords. Finally, at 27 minutes they would become great lords. At that time, even though the blue fire crows would only last for 3 more minutes, 3 level 30 great lords could easily wipe out an army of 1,000 level 30 elite players. By this point 18 minutes had passed since the blue fire crow's summoning, so all 3 were already high lords. Their damage could rival even great lords. Aside from MT classes, the blue fire crows only needed 1 strike to kill the other classes. How is Zero Wing so strong? Even though they have so few people, they've killed over 10,000 of our troops. Yet, we've only managed to claim over a dozen or so lives. For a time, after seeing how powerful Fire Dance and the other members of Zero Wing were, the enemy guild members refused charge forward, afraid that they would die instantly as well. Before this, everyone had only heard that Zero Wing was very strong. However, no one had ever actually witnessed their exact strength. Now, however, these guilds finally saw it for themselves. An army of 10,000 elite players was nothing to these experts. This scene also shocked Ouroboros's members. With just 400 players, they had instilled fear into tens of thousands of players. As an enemy they were a frightening force to reckon with. As an ally, however, they were incredibly dependable. Very easily, Zero Wing punched a hole through the encirclement of the various large guilds, creating a path of escape. However, facing the encirclement of over 200,000 players, even Zero Wing's members could only do so much. Ouroboros, which had started this war with an army of 50,000 players, had less than 30,000 members remaining. Should they continue fighting, they would most likely suffer complete and utter annihilation. Meanwhile, Stone Forest Town suddenly began to collapse, the buildings within the town crumbling one after another. A massive obelisk then emerged in the heart of the town, and Shi Feng stood atop this obelisk. What's going on? This commotion instantly attracted everyone's attention as they felt the ground beneath their feet quake. It was like an earthquake measuring 7 on the Richter scale had hit the area around Stone Forest Town. What are you trying to do? Surya shouted anxiously at Shi Feng, an expression of horror on his face. The 2 other leaders similarly stopped their pursuit as they glared at Shi Feng. This obelisk was their group's greatest secret. They had never imagined that Shi Feng would know about it or to rush into their stronghold to activate it. Of course, I want to witness the depths of hell. At this moment, Shi Feng looked ragged. Not only had he needed to avoid all the traps inside the stronghold, but he also had to dodge the 3 great leaders. Only after using all his usable life-saving skills had he managed to activate the greatest taboo obelisk in the Starmoon City region. Saying so, Shi Feng swung the abyssal blade, shattering the dazzling crystal ball on top of the obelisk. Stop! The 3 great leaders shouted in horror. Chapter 659, Town Token. What's going on? Seeing the 3 great leaders' panicked expressions, the players in Stone Forest Town turned to Shi Feng, who stood on top of the obelisk. The 3 great leaders were level 60 Tier 2 NPCs. At this stage of the game, these NPCs could squish players like ants. Yet, such powerful NPCs were actually afraid. What was going on? After Shi Feng shattered the crystal ball, he switched the 7 luminaries ring to the aura of space and used space movement to escape the town. In the next moment, a massive 5-fold magic array appeared above Stone Forest Town, enveloping it. Suddenly, mana rain began to fall on the town. Such a high mana density. My spell effects have doubled. This feels awesome. Many magical class players in the town grew excited. At this moment, the members of Ouroboros and the various large guilds had stopped fighting as they shifted their gazes towards the phenomenon in Stone Forest Town. The five-fold magic array covered the sky above the town and currently released a colorful brilliance. Even from so far away they could feel the dense mana filling the city. Suddenly, Stone Forest Town became a paradise for players. The higher the density of mana in the environment, the clearer and more active a player's mind was. These areas were helpful for improving a person's skill completion rate. Unfortunately, locations with high mana density were extremely rare in God's domain. Although the environmental mana in the Divine Colosseum's Trial Tower was quite dense, it was nothing compared to Stone Forest Town. Seeing that Stone Forest Town had such a valuable atmosphere, the various guilds' upper echelons began to drool. Regardless of the sacrifice, we must have a guild residence in Stone Forest Town. Ruthless greed flashed in these echelons' eyes. Setting aside the mana crystals of the Stoneclaw Mountains, capturing Stone Forest Town for its atmosphere was worth every sacrifice. If they possessed Stone Forest Town, they could send their guild's elites here to improve themselves. Although development here would not be as efficient as in the Divine Colosseum, they would not have to spend a single mana crystal on training. They could save a lot of money. Moreover, if they allowed their members to train in Stone Forest Town for long periods, the rate at which they nurtured experts would definitely surpass the other guilds. With a large group of experts, becoming even a super first-rate guild would be entirely possible. Without hesitation, the upper echelons of the various large guilds immediately reported this to their respective guild leaders. I never imagined that Stone Forest Town would have such a secret. I don't care what it takes. We must obtain Stone Forest Town. Hearing this news, the various guild leaders gave their orders. For a time, none of these guilds paid Ouroboros or Zero Wing any attention. Their members began to surge into Stone Forest Town. Moreover, with the dense mana surrounding the town, the closer these players got to the town, the stronger their combat power became. It was especially true for magical class players. Their combat power more than doubled. At this moment, it would be a piece of cake to clear out Stone Forest Town's NPCs. Although the NPCs in the city had also grown stronger due to the environmental mana, only the magical class NPCs received a damage buff. Their skill completion rates had not changed. However, that was not the case for players. The dense mana created a conducive environment that improved both spell effects and skill completion rate. Players had received a much greater boost to their combat power than the NPCs. Hence, capturing the town became much easier. Guild leader, just what did you do to Stone Forest Town? Aqua Rose could not bring herself to believe what she saw. Stone Forest Town was practically a cultivating heaven for players now. In addition, there were also the Stoneclaw Mountains magic crystals. Any guild that claimed the town would definitely become Starmoon Kingdom's overlord. Don't ask. Order everyone retreat from the town this instant, Shifeng said sternly. He had long since distanced himself from the town. In the past, when the Stoneclaw Mountains came into being, the dungeon had incited a war between Starmoon City's large guilds. Back then, however, nobody had claimed Stone Forest Town for themselves. Only after a long time had passed did the Star Alliance launch an assault on Stone Forest Town. Naturally, Stone Forest Town had not been a match for the first-rate guild. However, just before the guild captured the town, Surya had activated the obelisk. Shortly after, Star Alliance's army was obliterated. Initially, when Shifeng planned the attack on Stone Forest Town, he had intended to finish off Surya quickly, giving him no opportunity to activate the obelisk. However, since the situation no longer permitted that, he had no choice but to activate the obelisk himself. Under Shifeng's command, even though Aqua Rose and the others were reluctant, they quickly retreated from Stone Forest Town. Snow, let's go. As long as we snatch the town token dropped by the Great Leader, Stone Forest Town will belong to us. At that time, even if the Star Alliance and the other guilds band together, they will not be a match for us, Zhao Yueru suggested anxiously as she watched the guilds frantically surge into Stone Forest Town. If the other guilds obtained Stone Forest Town, Ouroboros would struggle to survive in Starmoon City. Glancing at Aqua Rose and the others, who gradually fled the town, Gentle Snow shook her head and said, "Let's retreat." But what about Stone Forest Town? With that many elite players, they could definitely exhaust the 3 great leaders to death. Not to mention the other guild's experts are currently making their way here, Zhao Yueru asked curiously. Black Flame told us to leave Stone Forest Town. He must have a reason. Otherwise, with 0 wing strength they could compete for the town token. Since they aren't trying to fight over it, there must be something wrong with Stone Forest Town. Moreover, Black Flame caused this himself. He must know more than we do. It's best that we retreat and observe the situation for now. Stone Forest Town tempted Gentle Snow as well, but she chose to maintain her calm because she knew that a calm mind was the strongest weapon in such a situation. Ha! Zhao Yueru sighed. Although she was disappointed, her friend had never been wrong. In the end, she could only turn and retreat after glancing at Stone Forest Town. Ouroboros's other members also began to retreat. Time passed little by little. The battle inside Stone Forest Town grew more intense as time passed. The environmental mana also grew denser. The players in the town fought madly in the thick mana. After more than 10 minutes of frantic battle, the majority of the NPCs inside Stone Forest Town had died. Only a few Tier 2 NPCs remained, desperately fighting for their lives. The elite players that surged into the town in waves were simply too much to handle, even for the 3 great leaders. At this moment, the 3 NPCs each had less than 30% of their HP remaining. On the other hand, there were still over 150,000 elite players in the city. Victory was in sight for the various guilds. Kill? Surya only has about 1 million HP left. Focus on avoiding his large-scale destruction spells. Guild leader has issued the command. Whoever secures the town token will be directly promoted to a guild elder, rewarded with a set of top-tier equipment and 5 million credits. The guild's upper echelons secretly sent commands through their respective guild channels. Aside from the guild elder position, owning a set of top-tier equipment was everyone's dreams. In addition, there was also the reward of 5 million credits. The town token's importance was obvious. To ordinary players, 5 million credits was an astronomical amount. If they had that kind of money, they wouldn't have to work a single day for the rest of their lives. In addition to the position of elder, they could enjoy a life of luxury. Suddenly, everyone began attacking with even greater enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Ouroboros and 0 Wings members, who watched from afar, grew anxious. Guild leader, at this rate, some other guild will claim the town token, Aqua Rose said anxiously as she looked to Shifeng, who maintained an extraordinary calm. However, as soon as Aqua Rose finished speaking, Surya, who was inside Stone Forest Town, suddenly bellowed, the sound waves sending all players within a radius of 30 yards flying. Before anyone noticed it, Surya's white hair had become a lustrous black. As if he had grown younger by several decades, his appearance morphed from one of an old man to that of a handsome youth. However, unlike ordinary people, this youth's eyes were pure black like 2 black pits. Those eyes contained no emotion, and just looking at them would send shivers down one's spine. It's finally coming, Shifeng grew serious as he watched the distant Surya. Aqua, have everyone prepare. Chapter 660 Awakened. The obelisk functioned as a seal. Meanwhile, crushing the crystal ball on top of the obelisk was equivalent to undoing the seal. Sealed inside the obelisk was something horrifying. Players only discovered later on that the thing sealed inside the obelisk was an awakened. It was akin to mutants among monsters. However, while a mutant was a mutation of a monster, an awakened was a mutation of an NPC. The probability of an awakened appearing was extremely low. Even Shifeng had never personally witnessed an awakened during his decade of experience playing God's domain. He had only heard bits of information about them. What followed the emergence of every awakened was a disaster. After the Star Alliance had accidentally triggered one such disaster in the past, more than 100,000 of its elites had crossed the river Styx. Even Galaxy Past had failed to escape back then. Compared to mutants, an awakened was much more frightening. Unlike mutants, an awakened was born with extremely high intelligence. It was the enemy of all living creatures. In addition, an awakened could rival even a fallen angel, a higher being of the same tier, so it was ridiculously powerful. The person sealed inside the obelisk was originally a Tier 5 divine mage. As the person was also an awakened, his strength was the equal of a fallen angels of the same tier. Only Tier 6 gods could suppress him. Fortunately, with the Awakened's body already obliterated and just its soul remaining in existence, it could only possess the body of another NPC, even after the removal of the seal. Meanwhile, at this moment, the Awakened had taken over Suriya's body and devoured the old man's soul, becoming the new owner of the body. After the possession, Suriya's strength underwent a heaven-defying change. He was no longer an existence that the old Suriya could compare to. Are we really going to take action now? Aqua Rosa's eyes widened as she stared at Suriya, who was hovering in midair in the distance. Unconsciously, she had started holding her breath. At this moment, Suriya was no longer a level 60 tier 2 NPC but already a true monster. Just looking at Suriya from a distance, Aqua Rose instinctively felt the need to run as far away as possible from him. Suriya, Awakened Great Mage. Level 50. HP 30, 000, 000/30, 000, 000. Not only had Suriya's body suddenly undergone a massive transformation, but even his statistics had also experienced an earth-shaking change. Although the NPC's level had fallen quite a bit, his HP had recovered back to full status. His class had even risen from a Tier 2 Professional Mage to a Tier 3 Great Mage, his strength increasing disproportionately. A Tier 3 NPC was equivalent to a Great Lord of the same level. On the other hand, a Tier 3 Awakened NPC possessed a strength that could rival even a Tier 4 NPC of the same level. A Tier 4 NPC was not an existence that current players could challenge at all. At this moment, the members of the various large guilds who had been frantically attacking Suriya before, were similarly stunned. After his transformation was complete, Suriya flexed his body tentatively. A moment later, the surrounding air began trembling. Immediately after, Suriya pointed a finger towards the sky. Suddenly, countless lightning bolts flashed down and gathered around Suriya's fingertip, forming a 2-story tall ball of lightning. Prepare to dodge. With so many people remaining, even a Tier 3 Great Mage is no match for us. A commanding level 29 Elementalist shouted. However, as soon as the Elementalist finished speaking, Suriya pointed his finger towards this Elementalist. The massive ball of lightning promptly transformed into a rushing river that poured down onto the Elementalist, devouring the Elementalist and all the players around him. Under the effects of the Tier 3 spell Lightning Stream, no players within an area of 15 by 100 yards survived. In the blink of an eye, several hundred people died. However, Suriya was still not satisfied. He then proceeded to use multiple Tier 3 spells in quick succession. Whether it was the players or NPCs inside Stone Forest Town, Suriya did not let a single person off the hook. In the Awakened NPC's hands, Tier 3 spells were like simple toys. He could forego chanting incantations, immediately casting his spells, not giving his targets any time to dodge at all. After just a short moment, despite everyone standing sparsely apart from each other, Suriya still managed to kill nearly 6,000 players. Meanwhile, the attacking players discovered that far from damaging the Awakened NPC, their onslaught couldn't even penetrate Suriya's magical shield at all. Suddenly, the players inside Stone Forest Town fell silent. No longer did they possess the enthusiasm from before. Run. Everyone retreat from this place quickly. Many guilds finally realized that they were nothing against the Tier 3 Great Mage at all and that the only thing they could do was run for their lives. Otherwise, none of them would leave this place alive. Guild leader, that monster is too scary. Look, the other guilds are all retreating. If we charge ahead right now, only death awaits us. Aqua Rose was deeply pessimistic about defeating such a powerful NPC. They would only suffer like the other guilds had if they tried fighting that monstrous existence. Who says we need to defeat him? We just need to seal him again, Shifeng laughed. In the past, when the seal on the obelisk was undone, the Awakened had gone on a rampage, throwing the players within the Starmoon City region into a panic. Moreover, as time passed, the Awakened had continuously risen in both levels and tiers. Even a coalition of the various guilds residing in Starmoon City had been utterly helpless against the Awakened. In the end, however, this incident was still solved. Back then, a player had discovered inside the obelisk the method to reseal the Awakened, utilizing an immense amount of magic crystals to repair the sealing crystal ball. Otherwise, with the strength of the players back then, it would have been absolutely impossible to stop the roaming Awakened. Should they encounter him, the only fate that awaited them was death. Meanwhile, now that Suriya was busy butchering the members of the various large guilds, It was the perfect opportunity to reseal the awakened NPC. Shifeng spent about 10 minutes running back to Stone Forest Town. During this period, Surya slaughtered over 100,000 players. At this moment, less than 50,000 players of the original 150,000 plus remained. When the various guild leaders learned of this death toll, they nearly vomited blood and passed out. Meanwhile, the guild that suffered the greatest loss was the Star Alliance. From their initial 70,000 elite members, less than 20,000 remained. Moreover, this number continued to decrease. With this, the Star Alliance is finished. After losing so many elite members, they will take a long time recovering from this loss. Zhao Yueru giggled as she pressed her hand to her chest. Although Ouroboros had suffered severe casualties in this war as well, having less than 30,000 elite members surviving out of the original 50,000, those were inconsequential compared to the losses of the other guilds. With this, Ouroboros would become the #1 guild of Starmoon City. Is this Black Flame's true plan? This moment drove home to Gentle Snow how fearsome Shifeng was. Just a single Stone Forest town had plunged so many elite members of the various large guilds to their deaths. If not for them working together with Zero Wing, Ouroboros would most likely have been one of those guilds right now. While Surya was hunting the members of the various guilds, Shifeng took the opportunity to dash towards the obelisk. Arriving at the top of the obelisk, Shifeng immediately retrieved 10,000 magic crystals from his bag and placed them atop the altar on which the crystal ball had originally Saturday. To any guild, 10,000 magic crystals was a massive sum. Fortunately, Shifeng had tasked Melancholic Smile to purchase them in bulk before the appearance of the Divine Colosseum. If not for capturing Stone Forest Town, Shifeng would not have readily parted with 10,000 magic crystals. In the next moment, the 10,000 magic crystals transformed into droplets of transparent liquid that quickly agglomerated into a sealing crystal ball. Despicable human. Surya panicked when he noticed the reformation of the crystal ball that had kept him sealed all this time. Using instantaneous movement, he flashed towards Shifeng. "You best return to where you came from," Shifeng muttered in a low tone as he looked at the rapidly approaching Surya. He then pressed his hand on the sealing crystal ball, muttering, "Fivefold seal activate." All at once, a fivefold magic array appeared above Stone Forest Town once more, illuminating the area around the town. "No!" Surya shouted defiantly as he attempted to use Tier 3 spells to attack the sealing crystal ball. Unfortunately for him, under the suppression of the fivefold magic array, he failed to cast even a single spell. In the next moment, golden chains descended from the magic array and wrapped around Surya's body. Shifeng had seen these golden chains before. Chains of order. Even gods were helpless against them, what more of Surya? These chains then dragged Surya above the obelisk. Suddenly, a blue chain emerged from the tip of the obelisk and pierced through his body. In the next moment, Surya released an agonized scream as the blue chain dragged a half-transparent soul out of his body and into the sealing crystal ball. Meanwhile, Surya's body, which had long since lost its original soul, died with the sealing of the awakened soul. A pile of loot also showered the ground along with the NPC's death. Chapter 661, Harvest After the Battle. He died. Everyone looked at the corpse of Surya, which had fallen on top of the obelisk like a broken rag doll, in disbelief. The Surya that had sent over 200,000 elite players running for their lives like dogs had perished almost instantly. It was like waking up to find that everything that happened before had been merely a bad dream. Just what did he do? Gentle Snow did not dare believe this situation was real. Such a powerful NPC like Surya had actually been no more than a toy for Shifeng. All this time, the various large guilds had been dancing on the palm of Shifeng's hand, as if these large guilds were at his beck and call. This feat was much more frightening than just relying on pure strength to defeat the various guilds. With this ability of his alone, he could easily instill fear in every guild in Starmoon Kingdom. While everyone was still stunned at the sudden development, some of the guild upper echelons quickly reacted. The Town Token. The Town Token was an item that dropped only from the leader of the town. Now that Surya had died, he would naturally drop the Town Token. As long as they obtained the Town Token, they could turn Stone Forest Town into a guild town. They would also receive protection from the kingdom for a limited time, during which they could set up shops and establish their own guild residences, allowing a smooth transfer of town management. In addition, the maps around Stone Forest Town ranged from level 30 to level 50. Players were sure to come to this area in the future, meaning the town had a very strategic location. Not to mention the Stoneclaw Mountains were only a short distance away. Everyone charge. We must get that town token no matter what. The upper echelons of the various guilds issued commands one after another, passing down the same order from their respective guild leaders. The various large guilds had already suffered tremendous losses from the war. If they still failed to obtain the town token, then wouldn't all their efforts have benefited their enemy instead? Under a unified command, everyone charged madly towards the heart of Stone Forest Town, all fully intent on killing Shifeng and taking the town token. At this time, Gentle Snow had also reacted, immediately shouting, "Everyone protect Black Flame as he retreats. Don't let the enemy succeed." After the town token dropped, a marker would appear on the player who picked it up. The marker would disappear only after 2 hours. The town token would also drop upon death. Moreover, during this period, the player holding the town token would not be able to use return scrolls and similar items. Hence, Shifeng could not escape to the city using a return scroll. He could only endure and survive through the 2 hours. At this point, Shifeng was the closest to Suria's corpse. Everyone else was still quite a distance away. It was obvious to everyone that the town token would fall into Shifeng's hands. Although the opposing guilds had less than 50,000 elite members left alive, these still posed a threat to Shifeng. Not to mention there was still a large group of experts on their way to the town. Fortunately, with 30,000 elite members, protecting Shifeng's retreat would be a walk in the park for Ouroboros. Once he was out of harm's way, he only needed to hide in a secluded location and wait out the 2 hours. Meanwhile, with the sealing of the Awakened now completed, the obelisk had also begun sinking back into the ground, disappearing from view. As for Shifeng himself, he was leisurely picking up the loot Suria dropped, paying no mind to the rapidly approaching army. Once an item was in his hands, it was practically impossible for anybody to steal it from him. Despite being only a Tier 2 NPC, the loot Suria dropped was quite bountiful. Suria had dropped more than 20 items, though the majority of them were magic crystals and some rare materials. Of the items dropped, the most valuable was the town token. The next was a magic array design. The rest were some level 50 weapons and equipment. However, the items were of low quality, uniformly of secret silver rank. Moreover, current players could not equip these items. Although this basic mana-gathering magic array is a good item, unfortunately it costs too many magic crystals to operate. At present, no guild will be able to sustain a magic array like this. Shifeng inwardly felt disappointed as he looked at the tattered design in his hand. The basic mana-gathering magic array could gather and condense mana into an area of 30 by 30 yards, allowing players to meditate and improve on their skill completion rates within it. Although the density of the mana inside the magic array would be slightly higher than in the Divine Colosseum's Trial Tower, the magic array cost 50 magic crystals per hour to maintain. In terms of development functions, the Trial Tower had the main god system showing players the perfect combat style of each class. This aspect of the Trial Tower was superior to the basic mana-gathering magic array, which did not supply players with any opponents. However, the magic array provided a perfect environment when players wished to train in the usage of their skills. After all, the Trial Tower would not give players any time to drill their skills. Unfortunately, the optimum number of players the basic mana-gathering magic array could accommodate was roughly 8 to 10. This capacity made the magic array very costly. Moreover, there would not be any noticeable effects if one only trained for 1 or 2 hours. Players usually had to train within the magic array for 5 or 6 hours. In other words, a guild would have to expend around 30 magic crystals per person, an exorbitant price for the current guilds of God's domain. Storing away the basic mana-gathering magic array design, Shifeng took out a golden key from his bag. Of the items Suria dropped, this was the third most valuable treasure, the key to Stone Forest Town's treasury. Every town occupied by a force of darkness would have its own treasury, just like the time when Zero Wing had raided Creek Town. However, as they had been on a crusade quest back then, the system had reduced the amount of treasure they could obtain significantly. Even so, it had still been a considerable harvest. On the other hand, since they had managed to actually capture Stone Forest Town without the aid of a crusade quest, the amount of treasure they could obtain would no doubt be enough to make guilds go crazy over it. However, this was a secret known only to players who had captured a town. Currently, the various large guilds of Starmoon City were still ignorant of this matter. Aqua, I'll leave this key with you. Take the main force and the Dark Gods Legion and clean out the treasury. Afterwards, reconvene back at White River City. Saying so, Shifeng passed the golden key to Aqua Rose. He then made a straight dash out of Stone Forest Town. Although he could easily shake off the various large guilds, he had no choice but to spend some time playing around with these guilds to buy some time for Aqua Rose and the others. Shit. Black Flame's escaped. After him. We can't let Black Flame get away no matter what. When the various large guilds saw Shifeng exiting Stone Forest Town and running towards the Limestone Hills, they immediately changed their course and headed in that direction as well. Looking at the elite army chasing behind him, Shifeng reduced his speed to give his pursuers some false hope as he slowly lured them away from the town. Guild leader, the town token has already fallen into Zero Wings and Ouroboros' hands. Our men most likely won't be able to keep up with Black Flame's speed. With this, it will become a lot more difficult for us to compete for the Stoneclaw Mountains. Purple Eye frowned when she watched the video from the members at Stone Forest Town. Stone Forest Town provided a geographical advantage in capturing the Stoneclaw Mountains. Now that Zero Wing and Ouroboros had secured the town, they had at least a 50% chance of claiming the dungeon for themselves. Not to mention with the massive loss that the various guilds of Starmoon City had just suffered, nobody was capable of hindering Ouroboros and Zero Wing. Given some time, the odds that the two guilds would claim the Stoneclaw Mountains would rise to 70% to 80%. It seems that I really underestimated Black Flame. However, ultimately Starmoon City is still the Star Alliance's territory. Even if Zero Wing and Ouroboros have obtained Stone Forest Town, they should not even dream of monopolizing the Stoneclaw Mountains, Galaxy Past said, a cold glint flashing across his eyes. Let's return to Starmoon City for now. Purple, contact the other guilds and have them spread the news about the Stoneclaw Mountains. I want to see just how Zero Wing and Ouroboros intend to swallow up the Stoneclaw Mountains. Time passed quickly. After Shifeng toyed around with the various large guilds for 2 hours, he immediately used a return scroll and teleported back to White River City. However, Shifeng did not return directly to the guild residence. Instead, he brought the town token of Stone Forest Town to the Adventurers Association. Chapter 662, Guild Town. Ever since players had started paying attention to the guard system, the Adventurers Association had seen increased traffic with every passing day. Many players who were not proficient in battles had focused their attention on NPC guards. Many were also taking advantage of this growing popularity to make a fortune for themselves. At this point, physical class bronze guards sold for 120 gold. The selling price for a magical class bronze guard, on the other hand, was over 300 gold. Meanwhile, physical class mysterious iron guards sold for 600 gold, not to mention magical class mysterious iron guards. As long as one managed to obtain a physical class mysterious iron guard, a player could easily get rich overnight if they sold said guard. Hence, more and more players came to the Adventurers Association to test their foresight and luck. As a result, the Adventurers Association was packed every day with players, who would chat idly while waiting for their turn, and the Adventurers Association had become the #1 source of information in every city. Many independent players would come to the Adventurers Association to either exchange or collect information regarding God's domain. Before Shifeng even entered the building, he had already heard plenty of people discussing the Stoneclaw Mountains. A regional dungeon appeared over at Starmoon City. I heard that even the small mobs there drop magic crystals. It can't be true, right? Shouldn't it just have a slightly higher drop rate compared to team dungeons? This is something else that I heard from a friend of mine over at Starmoon City. Because of the Stoneclaw Mountains, every guild in Starmoon City is in chaos. The guilds even waged war a few hours ago. In the end, the various large guilds suffered tremendous losses. For now, the Stoneclaw Mountains remain unclaimed. Currently, as long as you are level 30, even an independent player can enter the dungeon freely. It's a pity that my level is still too low. Otherwise, I would have been grinding for magic crystals there already. I've also found out about this matter from one of my friends who's in a guild. According to him, You can obtain 1 or 2 magic crystals just by grinding inside the Stoneclaw Mountains for an hour. The efficiency there is higher than even in a 20-man hard mode team dungeon. Currently, guilds in the various cities across the kingdom are organizing teams to set out for the Stoneclaw Mountains. All of you have outdated information. There aren't just magic crystals inside the Stoneclaw Mountains. The monsters inside also drop plenty of level 30 or above top-tier equipment. The potential income there is much higher than even from large-scale team dungeons. Not to mention the cities in Starmoon Kingdom, many players from the surrounding kingdoms and Black Dragon Empire are also heading towards the Stoneclaw Mountains. The rumors immediately tempted the many players inside the association who heard about the Stoneclaw Mountains. Unfortunately, none of them had reached level 30 yet. Otherwise they too could get a share of the pie. They've released news about it already? Shi Feng smirked faintly. Unfortunately, doing so is useless. With Stone Forest Town under his control, the Stoneclaw Mountains were practically in his hands already. There were bound to be unreconciled guilds that would try to stir up some trouble. However, these guilds did not truly know what Stone Forest Town's becoming a guild town signified. Upon Shi Feng's entry into the Adventurers Association's reception hall, Aqua Rose, who had long since been waiting for him, immediately walked up to him. Smiling sweetly, she said, "Guild leader, we've struck gold this time." Shi Feng simply laughed in response, not bothering to probe deeper into Aqua Rose's words as he led the woman up to the second floor. The hall on the first floor catered to individual players, while the one on the second floor specialized in managing guild affairs. "Guild leader, are you not curious about what we found inside the treasury?" Aqua Rose pouted slightly. Originally, she had wanted to tease Shi Feng a little bit with the answer. She had not expected Shi Feng to be completely uninterested. The harvest they gained from Stone Forest Town this time was more bountiful than the one from Creek Town. Just the amount of coins they obtained exceeded 3,000 gold. There were also more than 400 Tier 1 magic scrolls, over 100 Tier 2 magic scrolls, over 2,000 magic crystals, over 1,000 Tier 1 gemstones, and over 300 Tier 2 gemstones. In addition, they had found a large number of rare materials as well as many level 50 bronze and mysterious iron equipment. Normally, such a harvest would require a very long time for Zero Wing to amass. However, they had managed to get it from just a single town battle. If the other guilds knew, the various guild leaders would most likely die from anger, yet Shi Feng remained utterly indifferent to it. "Have you brought the money?" Shi Feng turned around and asked Aqua Rose. "I've retrieved the money from the guild and the candlelight trading firm." Aqua Rose nodded, then handed all the coins to Shi Feng. Before she had come to the Adventurers Association, Shi Feng had tasked her with making a trip to the candlelight trading firm to collect all the funds the trading firm had earned recently. She had also retrieved Zero Wing's income from guild quests. When Aqua Rose was collecting the money, despite having been an honorary elder of Twilight Echo, a long-established first-rate guild, even she received a fright. She had never imagined that Zero Wing actually possessed that much money. There was a total of 13,000 gold. Not to mention one first-rate guild, even 3 or 4 first-rate guilds combined would not possess that much liquid funds. Including what I have here, it should be enough. Shi Feng accepted the money and quickly arrived before a counter. "Greetings, Lord Count. How may I be of service to you today?" the blonde NPC beauty asked with a smile. "I wish to construct a guild town." "Here is the town token," Shi Feng said, placing the town token on the countertop. "A moment, please." After the NPC clerk accepted the town token, she began manipulating the crystal ball on the counter. "This is the town token for Stone Forest Town. Stone Forest Town is situated within the Starmoon City region. If you wish to construct a guild town, you will have to pay a registration fee of 6,000 gold as well as a basic construction fee of 5,000 gold. In the future you will also have to pay a monthly management fee of 5,000 gold. Does my lord wish to hire any guards?" "Yes." Shi Feng nodded. "Okay. The offers we have here are as follows: 10 level 150 common guards for 10 gold per 3 days, 10 level 150 elite guards for 50 gold per 3 days, 10 level 150 tier 1 guards for 100 gold per 3 days, and 10 level 150 tier 2 guards for 300 gold per 3 days. May I know how many guards my lord wishes to employ?" the NPC clerk reported. Meanwhile, standing beside Shi Feng, Aqua Rose was shocked when she heard these prices. She never imagined that hiring guards would be so costly. However, what Aqua Rose did not know was that their guild could get these guards only because they had just established the town. Once 15 days passed, they would no longer receive such a treatment. I'll hire 300 common guards, 40 elite guards, and 10 tier 1 guards for 15 days, Shifeng replied after making a rough estimate based on the size of Stone Forest Town. Normally, a town of such a size required around 500 NPCs. However, he lacked funds at the moment, thus he could hire only this many. Okay. The total is 15,000 gold. However, as my lord is a count of the city, you receive a 10% discount, lowering the total to 13,500 gold, the NPC clerk said, smiling. In contrast to the sincere smile on the female NPC's face, Aqua Rose had an extraordinarily gloomy expression on her face right now. If Shifeng were not a count of White River City, entitling him to a 10% discount, the money she brought definitely would not have been sufficient. However, Shifeng paid the 13,500 gold without hesitation. After all, he knew full well that, compared to the money he just spent, he would earn even more money from Stone Forest Town in the future. The wealth a guild town could bring was originally quite daunting already, not to mention Stone Forest Town with its close proximity to the Stoneclaw Mountains. Chapter 663, Preparing a Town. After handing over 13,500 gold, the NPC clerk handed Shifeng a deed. With this deed, Stone Forest Town would only belong to Shifeng from this point forward. He could construct any building he desired within the town's confines without restriction. I finally have some capital. Shifeng was inwardly overjoyed as he looked at the deed of Stone Forest Town. There were countless guilds in God's domain. If a guild wanted to stand on its own feet, it first needed its own guild residence. If a guild wanted to develop and flourish, then it needed its own guild town. A guild was a massive machine, a machine that required a large sum of money to operate and maintain. Although a guild could earn a lot of money through trading firms during the early stages of the game, it was chump change compared to what a guild town could generate. However, as players reached higher levels, they would have more sources to earn an income. Hence, coins would depreciate as time passed. Meanwhile, guild towns were different. A guild could construct various establishments in their own town. A town also offered a wide array of business models for the guild. Guild towns were different from NPC towns that only accepted coins. In guild towns, the ruling guild could even require credits as payment. In God's domain, NPC towns were very restricting. For example, it was extremely difficult for players to purchase their own houses or shops. However, guild towns did not have those restrictions. Only money was necessary. Furthermore, guild towns were generally constructed off the beaten path, providing players on the front lines a place to rest and reorganize without needing waste time traveling back to cities. It was especially true for a strategic town like Stone Forest Town. It was very easy to lure players to the town. Most likely, once the town began operating, its player traffic would even surpass White River City. One could easily earn a ton of money just by opening a small shop there, not to mention the money one could earn from controlling the entire town. Unfortunately, in order to develop the town, Shifeng needed to construct various buildings such as restaurants, an auction house, an adventurers association, shops, bars, hotels, and other establishments. The cost would be significant. I need more money, Shifeng could not help but sigh as he considered the cost. The various large guilds in Starmoon City were of the mind that as long as they obtained Stone Forest Town, they could easily earn a large sum of money. If these guilds really had obtained Stone Forest City, most likely, the only thing they would have done was stare at it. Aside from the construction cost of various lifestyle buildings, just the basic construction and registration fees were enough to bleed a first-rate guild dry. Even with Zero Wing's financial strength, it would be extremely taxing to operate Stone Forest Town. Afterward, the cost would continue to climb as they prepared to open Stone Forest Town to the public. Time passed quickly. Unknowingly, 2 days had gone by. For people in the real world, 2 days was nothing. To players in Starmoon Kingdom, however, they had spent every waking moment grinding to reach level 30 and enter the Stoneclaw Mountains for magic crystals. During these 2 short days, the number of players that had entered the Stoneclaw Mountains had increased significantly. Every guild in Starmoon City had fallen silent as they busied themselves with their own agendas, acting as if the war at Stone Forest Town had never occurred. Shifeng had focused solely on reconstructing Stone Forest Town, executing his initial plans for the town. Although Feng could have relegated this task to Aqua Rose, for assurance's sake, he chose to do it himself. After all, he had several carefully considered plans in mind. He was also more familiar with the town's layout. Furthermore, he had his own plans for his guild's future. Hence, it was best if he dealt with the town's reconstruction. In the meantime, Aqua Rose tagged along with Fire Dance's team to raid the 100-man team dungeon, Frost Prison. As a 100-man team dungeon, ordinary dungeons could not compare to the Frost Prison. The bosses inside were all great lords. The least valuable items that dropped in the dungeon were level 30 fine gold equipment. There was also a high chance for dark gold equipment to drop. To current players, such equipment was among the best. Hence, the various large guilds desperately raided dungeons. Of course, they focused on these dungeons for the fame of obtaining first clears, but they also did so to prepare for the Stoneclaw Mountains. As an Asura mode regional dungeon, how could the Stoneclaw Mountains be easy? Even these guilds' main forces would find the dungeon difficult to survive. Moreover, they could only grind in the dungeon's outermost region. To obtain a large number of magic crystals, they needed to venture further into the Stoneclaw Mountains. Hence, the various large guilds focused on avenues to improve their equipment. The fastest way to do so was through 100-man team dungeons. Meanwhile, Zero Wing's dungeon progression thus far was quite efficient. With the power of darkness and the improvements they had gained from challenging the Trial Tower repeatedly, Zero Wing's main force had reached the final boss, the Frost Giant. At this moment they only needed a little luck to clear the dungeon. The basics should be finished by now. With this, I can finally launch Stone Forest Town. Feng glanced at the time, feeling that construction of the town's basic infrastructure should be complete. Normally, after a guild obtained a town, the town would have to undergo a construction period of 2 or 3 days. However, in truth, Feng had spent most of the time completing Zero Wing's guild residence in Stone Forest Town. Compared to Zero Wing's guild residence in White River City, the guild residence in Stone Forest Town was larger and more extravagant. While Zero Wing's residence in White River City could only accommodate a few tens of thousands of people at one time, the newly constructed guild residence in Stone Forest Town could accommodate up to 100,000 people. Moreover, as Zero Wing was a 2-star guild, there were plenty of 2-star private rooms in the new residence. In comparison, White River City's guild residence did not even have enough private rooms for the guild's core members. Guild leader, here are the materials you requested, Melancholic Smile said as she entered the advanced forging room and unloaded the collection of rare materials onto the large stone table. By this point, Melancholic Smile had become an intermediate forger thanks to the large amount of resources that she had been given access to. Currently, she was very close to becoming an advanced forger. In addition, she was also one of the 8 great intermediate forgers in Starmoon Kingdom. Among these 8 great intermediate forgers, 4 belonged to the Candlelight trading firm. Throughout Starmoon Kingdom, not a single trading firm could compete with Candlelight. Good. Notify Coco and the others. We'll be going on a trip in a moment. Feng nodded as he stored his plans. He then took inventory of the materials. Melancholic Smile nodded in confusion. She did not understand why Feng suddenly wanted her and the others to accompany him. They were simply forgers. They had no combat capabilities whatsoever. Gathering these materials sure took a lot of time. If not for Gentle Snow, who knows how long it would have taken. After confirming that nothing was missing, Feng smiled satisfactorily. These were the materials he needed to construct a teleportation magic array. Every one of these items was extremely rare, even to large guilds. Gentle Snow had only obtained these materials for Feng after using her personal connections. Following which, Feng stored the materials and led Melancholic Smile and the others towards Stone Forest Town. Arriving in Stone Forest Town. The town was no longer a gathering place for red names. All around, one could see level 150 guards patrolling the streets. Any player who wished to attack Stone Forest Town had to go through them first. Level 150 guards. Even a common guard at this level could kill current players instantly, not to mention Tier 1 and Tier 2 guards. Even an army of hundreds of thousands of players would fail to capture the town now. Chapter 664, New Residents. The construction of Stone Forest Town's basic infrastructure was finally complete. A massive 8-story-tall building dominated the town's heart. Zero Wing's 6-wing guild emblem graced the front of this building, and even from afar one could see it clearly. This fortress-like superstructure was none other than Zero Wing's new guild residence. Aside from Zero Wing's residence, the second most eye-catching architecture was a 7-story shop. Shi Feng had prepared this for the candlelight trading firm. To construct this shop, Shi Feng had paid a total of 1,500 gold in material fees. Fortunately, he was in charge of the town. Otherwise, the price of the land alone would have emptied Zero Wing's coffers. The town also possessed plenty of 2-story buildings for other players to use. If not for his lack of funds, Shi Feng would have preferred 5-story buildings rather than 2-story. After all, these buildings were all within Stone Forest Town's golden area. The taller the building was, the more he could charge in rent. Shi Feng had specifically designed the town to allow its main street to lead towards the Stoneclaw Mountains. Any players that entered the town with intentions of heading towards the Stoneclaw Mountains would have to travel down the main street. Hence, the flow of traffic would have to pass by these shops, ensuring that they would not go unnoticed. Furthermore, Shi Feng had also constructed a hotel and smithy, infrastructures that were most important to players. Only, as his funds were limited at the moment, the hotel and smithy were quite ordinary. He could only reconstruct them in the future. When Melancholic Smile saw the town, her eyes instantly lit up. Although she did not participate in any combat, she was well informed. She had long since known that Zero Wing had taken control of Stone Forest Town. However, she had never imagined that Zero Wing would be capable of so much. The candlelight trading firm's 2-star shop in White River City was only 5 stories tall, yet the shop here was 7 stories tall. Moreover, it occupied a much larger area. Not only could the shop here accommodate many more lifestyle players, but there was also no need to fuss about lacking space for a warehouse. At this point, the candlelight trading firm was developing faster and faster. Although they had set up branches in many important cities, there was simply not enough space to store the materials they collected due to Shi Feng's hoarding requests. After they had filled their shop's warehouses, they had no choice but to rent warehouses from the bank. However, such a massive shop in Stone Forest Town would solve much of their storage problem. Shi Feng quickly led Melancholic Smile and the others to Zero Wing's new guild residence. This is the design for the teleportation magic array. Take a look. I hope that you can manufacture it as soon as possible, Shi Feng said as he revealed the design. Any player, regardless of class, could manufacture the teleportation magic array. Only, as the manufacturing process was too complex and cumbersome, it was not a job for a single person. Moreover, highly skilled forging players would have a higher success rate with the teleportation array. Hence, Shi Feng asked Melancholic Smile and the other intermediate forgers to construct it for him. Teleportation magic array design? Everyone was thunderstruck. Although they were not combat players, they knew full well just how valuable a teleportation magic array was. Their trip to Stone Forest Town had proven this. In total, they had spent over 10 hours traveling from White River City to Stone Forest Town. There were only 48 hours in a day in God's domain, and most players would only be online for roughly 20 to 30 of those hours. Hence, it was extremely frustrating to spend more than 10 hours on travel. Unfortunately, players had no choice but to travel here as this was the leveling map for players level 30 and above. The Stoneclaw Mountains also loomed nearby, reminding players of the benefits it offered. If there were a teleportation magic array, however, many things would become easier. If they constructed a teleportation magic array in Stone Forest Town, they could teleport between the town and other cities. They could save more than 10 hours of travel time. While others wasted more than 10 hours of their day, they could use that time to focus on more important matters. It would be extremely easy to shake off the other guilds. However, what no one knew was that Shi Feng had other plans for the teleportation array in this town. The teleportation magic array's manufacturing process is so complex. Cream Coco's interest was more than piqued. When forging weapons and equipment, forgers would often engrave runes or other strange images on the items. She was absolutely clueless about the meaning behind these runes and images. However, as they played an important role in determining her forging success rate, she often retreated to the library for research. Unfortunately, what she could learn from the library was limited. Although she had learned plenty, her understanding of runes and images was still half-baked. The teleportation magic array was intensely magical. The array utilized a massive number of runes and images. The teleportation magic array design was different from ordinary forging designs. The design referred to many concepts that were not available in the library's database. Guild leader, this will be a massive undertaking. With a few of us here, it will take a very long time to complete. Melancholic Smile laughed bitterly after a brief examination of the design. I know. However, the teleportation magic array is exceptionally difficult to manufacture. Even basic forgers will struggle to meet the minimum requirements. Hence, I've asked a few of you. After you discuss and distribute the tasks, make a photocopy of the part of the design you will work on and find me for the materials you require. Shi Feng had already predicted that his forgers would need a lot of time to complete the task. However, he would rather waste a little time than deal with unnecessary failures. Fortunately, the teleportation magic array was an assembly of parts. Even if Melancholic Smile and the others failed to manufacture certain parts, they would not need to restart the process from scratch. However, the materials he had on hand were limited. He really did not dare risk letting basic forgers try their hand. After Melancholic Smile and the others finished splitting up the workload and photocopied the teleportation magic array design, Shi Feng stored the design and headed towards the first floor's lounge. The teleportation magic array design was different from ordinary designs. It was not a learning type design. After a player clicked to learn an ordinary design, said design would become useless, and the player would have learned to produce the item recorded. However, the teleportation magic array design could not be learned in such a way. Players could only mimic the procedures recorded. Moreover, the design was a consumable item. Once players completed all procedures and managed to manufacture the teleportation magic array, it would not be functional yet. The actual design was needed to activate the teleportation array because the design itself contained special magic. This special magic was required to fix the teleportation coordinates to the array in question. The teleportation magic array design could be used to fix transfer coordinates up to 10 times. The design did not allow players to learn and produce an unlimited number of teleportation magic arrays. Inside the guild's lounge, Shi Feng retrieved a magic scroll. However, unlike ordinary magic scrolls which were only the size of a book, this magic scroll was as large as he was. Shi Feng had spent 300 gold to obtain this magic scroll. Its function was to bind coordinates. It allowed guild members to use transfer scrolls to teleport to the guild residence they were bound to. Previously, as Zero Wings guild residents occupied White River City, even without using a transfer scroll, Zero Wings members could just use a return scroll to return to White River City. Hence, this magic scroll would have only been a waste of money. However, things were different now. Now that Zero Wing had a residence in Stone Forest Town, even if the town did not possess a teleportation array, guild members could simply purchase a transfer scroll from the guild hall and teleport to Stone Forest Town. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.